Second item is approval of the agenda. Can I get a mover for that? Moved by Mayor Bailey, second by Councillor Coleman. Is there anybody that wishes to add anything to the agenda this evening? Seeing none, I'll call a vote. All in favor? Opposed? None? Okay, thank you. Delegations, pecuniary interest, please do so at the appropriate time. Delegations, petitions, presentations, we have none under item 4, but we do have one under item 9, and that be Watson and Associates. They'll be making a 30-minute presentation approximately this evening. So that's when we'll have a presentation. Fifth item on the agenda is adoption of the minutes from the February 2nd meeting. Can I get a mover, please, to get those on the floor to adopt? Moved by Councillor Pierce, and I see Councillor Wheat with his hand up, second. Does anybody have anything they wish to correct, bring up, discuss? Okay, see none. I'll ask that show of hands, all in favor of adopting those minutes. And opposed, I see none. Thank you. Okay, so any business arising from those minutes? Okay, see none. This will take us to item 7. And the first one, for anybody listening or watching, is anything under item 7 tonight is a public hearing under the Planning Act to receive information from the public. So this, we only have one tonight, one item, and if anybody wishes to receive any information on this in the future, but when it may come back for another, for a decision at planning, they're asked to get a hold of our planning staff, and they'll make sure they get on the email list. Okay, so first off, I'll ask our planner to come forward and present this. And I guess it's you, Ryan. Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chair, and I trust everybody can see my screen here. I have a couple of slides to share.
Yeah, you're live.
Thank you. Okay. All right, thank you. So the subject lands are located on the east side of Mount Pleasant Road, north of McGill Road, and south of Phelps Road in Mount Pleasant. Subject lands are approximately 0.389 hectares, or 0.961 acres in size, and are surrounded by a mix of low-density residential and agricultural uses. Subject lands are currently zoned as Agriculture A and are designated in the official plan as both suburban residential and agricultural. The applicant, who's present tonight, I believe, to speak, is proposing to amend the zoning on a portion of the subject lands to construct a dwelling in accordance with the suburban residential SR zone criteria. Currently, the Agriculture A zoning on the subject lands would require a minimum interior side yard of 4 meters, whereas the applicant is proposing to construct a dwelling in accordance with the suburban residential minimums with an interior side yard setback 1.5 meters. The area to be rezoned is approximately 0.25 hectares or 0.61 acres, which will match the limits of the suburban residential official plan designation on the subject lands. The balance of the lands to the rear of the property will remain in the Agricultural A zone, which would match the agricultural official plan designation. Staff are here to present this application for information purposes only, and will bring forward a report at a later date with recommendation. And I'd be happy to respond to any questions at this time. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ryan. We will have the applicant come up, but before we do that, I'll turn to the committee and ask if there's anybody that has a question for Ryan at this time. Okay, I don't see any hands up, and so knowing that, I'll ask the agent or the applicant to come forward and talk about this application. And who do we have, Adam, coming forward?
Through Mr. Chair, Adam Lahoina is here, and just to note, he does not have a camera. He just has a microphone.
Okay, Adam. Okay, so if you want to talk about your application, please feel free to do so.
Okay. Sorry, this is my first time in one of these types of meetings, so I'm not sure how this goes. But my client wishes to construct a larger residence for his family in compliance with the SR zone, which we understand is what the official plan would allow for. And in our opinion, what we're proposing to do aligns the property more closely with the official plan than its current zoning. and also in general is in accordance with the Ontario's general plan to support the development of communities and residential dwellings of all sizes for all levels of income. The current dwelling is I guess too small for their needs, and the property itself is too small to be a useful farm. So we think the suburban residential zone is more appropriate for this property.
Okay, does that conclude your comments, Adam?
Yes.
I'm not rushing you. I'm just checking.
Well, yeah, like I said, I'm not sure what else.
Yeah, no, that's fair enough. I mean, some applications require a little more explanation, so no, that's fine. Okay, if you don't mind, Adam, I'll turn this over to the committee and see if anybody has any questions for Adam on this application. Okay, Councillor Wheat, I see your hand up. Go ahead.
Will the existing dwelling be torn down or will it stay?
So it will be torn down. The applicant does wish to temporarily, or at least he's considering temporarily leaving it during construction and then demolishing after construction has been completed. But it's certainly, yeah, it will be demolished. The plan is just for the one residence.
Very good. Adam, you did very well for the first time, and just being on the telephone, you did very, very well.
Thank you.
Thank you for the question, Councillor Wheat. Anybody else have a question for the applicant or the agent of the applicant? Okay, seeing none, Adam, thank you. At this point, I do, because it's a public meeting, I am going to open it up to the public. And Adam Crozier, our clerk, is there anybody from the public here tonight to speak to this that you're aware of?
Hi, Mr. Chair. No, there are no members of the public here to speak to this application.
Okay, but again, as per the last meeting, I'll go through the motions anyways, and I'll ask a second time if there's anybody from the public that wishes to speak to this application. And I'll ask a third time if there's anybody from the public that wishes to speak to this application. Seeing or hearing none, I'll close this part of the meeting to the public. Okay, Adam, Adam LaHoya, the agent, thank you. And I'll ask the committee how they would like to proceed with this this item this evening. Okay, Councillor Wheat.
To move to receive as information.
Okay, and second by Councillor Coleman. Any further discussion or questions on it? Okay, see none, I'll call it. All in favor? Opposed? Okay, seeing none. So we'll move to receive. And again, for anybody that's watching this at a later date, it will still have to come forward if it wishes to proceed further for a decision. But tonight, this was only for information. Okay, so that concludes any items under item 7 where we're receiving for information, and we go to item 8, and this is public hearings under the Planning Act to consider staff recommendations. And again, we have a single one this evening. Again, this is Chapin, 209 Pleasant Ridge Road, and I'll call for it. I believe it's Amanda, and she's just getting ready. So Amanda, whenever you're ready, you can proceed to present this one.
Thank you, through the chair. The applicant is proposing to rezone the subject lands with a site-specific provision to recognize an undersized farm parcel of 27.3 hectares as a result of a lot line adjustment application in September 2020 through the Committee of Adjustment. The subject lands are designated as agricultural and will continue to be farmed. The applicant is proposing to rezone the subject lands from agricultural to agricultural-168. The site-specific provision will recognize an undersized farm parcel of 27.3 hectares, or approximately 67.5 acres, The rezoning was a condition of approval from the Committee of Adjustment. Staff are recommending approval, and I can answer any questions the committee members may have. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Amanda. This is hard for me because I need you to not share your screen so I can unfortunately see everybody here. And that's just, I guess, the nature of the beast. So I'll look at the committee and ask if anyone from the committee has a question of our planner at this time. And Councillor Chambers, I see you have your hand up. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, through you to the planner. I'm a little bit confused on this application, to be honest with you. Prior to the severance, the parcel that is looking to be zoned, identify the minimum, less than the minimum size requirement. The property already is below the minimum requirement. Is that correct?
Thank you. Through the chair, right now, the parcel is considered undersized, and as a result of the lot line adjustment, it lost its legal nonconforming status. And as a result of not having that legal nonconforming status, we now have to recognize it through the zoning bylaw, which is the purpose of this zoning application.
So what you're saying is that before the severance, the property is below the requirement, and after the severance, the property is below the requirement. And I'm having a hard time understanding why we're putting an applicant through a situation where before and after are essentially the same. The parcel is below the minimum requirement. I understand there's a legal non-conforming situation here, but probably there are a vast number of minimum size parcels across the country. And for example, when we have zoned properties that to restrict a dwelling off the property when there's a surplus dwelling, we don't require an A dash number question mark to recognize it's an undersized lot. So and if I recall, other lot line adjustments have occurred without this having to happen. So I'm wondering if this is a new requirement we're all of a sudden requiring, or can you point to a consistent pattern of what we've done in the past, recognizing undersized parcels as a result of severances?
I can handle that one. Sorry, it's
You give it a shot, Matt.
yeah, it's Matt speaking. So through the chair to Councillor Chambers, this is a new legal interpretation. So that is why this is something that it does appear new. So it is a technical matter. So when the lot was originally created as an undersized farm parcel, the zoning at the time would have permitted it. However, now that the lot is being changed, it loses, like as Amanda says, it loses that legal non-complying status. And so it becomes just illegal. So we need, as a technical matter, we do need to fix the zoning on it. So that's why it's before the committee tonight.
Are you saying that this is the first time we've done this? Because the first time I can remember it being done in a manner such as this. And I'm just wondering, it seems like a bit of an onerous burden to put on the property owner, essentially going through an application, the cost and the timing involved to basically rectify what you're calling a technical matter with a new legal interpretation. I'm just wondering if we can have an interpretation where we don't have to put, and I recognize this is a policy question, but it is related to the application. I'm wondering if we can review that legal requirement, legal interpretation, and maybe use common sense. And if things aren't really changing in terms of size of parcels, maybe we can save some applicants some time and money and trouble.
Through the chair to Council Chambers, it duly noted. We did consult with our county solicitor on this one just to make sure that we were doing it correctly. And we also went out and reviewed other municipalities just as a reference point as well. And there are others dealing with this type of technical matter the same way. But as you've requested, we can go back and double check with our county solicitor on this one. And I should also point out the fee for it, for this type of application, is our minor zoning amendment fee and not the major fee.
And just Mr. Chairman, I might conclude by saying that we are reviewing our official plan, and I think anybody that's in the farming business recognizes that minimum farm parcels of 100 acres are not that much different than 40 acres anymore. Years ago, small farms were common. Nowadays, farm parcels are, it's hard to make a living on a 100-acre parcel or a minimum size parcel. So that minimum requirement, I think, needs to be looked at in terms of policy and in terms of keeping up in time with the change in agriculture across the county. But I'll leave it at that, and I hope I didn't detract from the application by getting into the policy discussion, Mr. Chairman.
No, I appreciate it. Thank you. No, I mean, I have to be honest with you. I read it and I thought, we're taking an undersized parcel, we're making an undersized parcel. So that clears it up, I think, for the whole committee. At the same time, I appreciate Matt, our Director of Planning, pointing out that the fees aren't quite the same as a major variance. So any other questions for our planner? I'll go to Councillor Bell next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to the planners. Really just following on from what Councillor Chambers said, this is a very simple application. There are no public comments. There's no change of usage. I think this is an ideal example of going back to our discussion the other week about how we might change council structure to make us more efficient. This is one of the efficiencies we could have. I think this could have been left with our staff to decide without bringing it to council. And I hope that we can build on what Councillor Chambers said to add that to it. Thank you.
Through the chair, that's a good point. And we are going through our official plan process right now. This could be one of those examples that we develop sort of an automatic process where rather than it coming to committee, it would just go straight to council with a bylaw. So that is something that we'll take into consideration as part of our official plan review process.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions for our planner at this time? Seeing none, I'll ask if the applicant or his agent or their agent is present. And would they like to speak?
Mr. Chairman, I guess you can't see my hand. I've had it up about 3 times.
Councillor Gatward, I don't know about your connection, but in my connection, you are a ghost half the time this evening. So sometimes it's going in and out. Yeah. So, okay, go ahead. If I don't see you, Joan, do exactly what you did. And to anybody, just shout it out. Because as you can see well, I don't know if you guys are seeing the same what I am, but Councillor Gatward is going in and out quite a bit.
Yeah, it's the background on our computer.
Okay, go ahead, Joan.
I might have to change that background. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you to staff. We've severed off that corner now, and there, excuse me, there wasn't an additional severance down Pleasant Ridge Road. The buildings in the corner next to the cutout severance, is that the barn and a house? The reason I'm asking, there's still a barn and a house on this farm parcel for the Chapin family where they reside. And the reason I'm asking, because if there isn't a house on this parcel, then we would have to do a bylaw to prohibit another dwelling going up, correct?
Thank you through the chair. That is correct. There is a house and an accessory structure on the retained lands. And since that was not part of the lot line adjustment, we do not need to rezone to prohibit a dwelling. They would not be able to build another dwelling, like full-size dwelling on this property.
Thank you very much. You've answered my question.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Godward. Any other questions? Okay, is the agent or the applicant here this evening to speak to this?
Yes, Robert Lefebvre, I'm here to go ahead.
Okay, Robert, yeah, go ahead. You can speak to the committee about this application of yours.
Well, I must say I'm very sympathetic and thanked Councilman Chambers for his input. We were kind of surprised too to see that was required to take a zoning from undersized agricultural to undersized agricultural. But when you recognize that the planning process set the minimum size for farms, this one got authorized when when the bylaw first came into existence, and therefore it's no longer the same farm that was a pre-existing non-conforming use. We understand where the legal aspect of why the county's coming at it from that point of view. I heard that the planners say that the fees were the minimum. Well, the fees were $3,000, so I mean it's not like it's a light touch to do this. And of course, then a condition has come back that we've approved and we're ready to go with, which is the lot line adjustment. A road widening will be approved, and the Chapin family is going to lose a little more of their land, make it even a little bit smaller. But as we went back on the original severance application, this was a triangle of land that was less efficient for the Chapins to farm. The neighbor, who's a hobby farmer, can farm it with smaller equipment and more efficiently, in the sense that he doesn't have a big farm. He's just a guy who does that on the side. And so the severance, we think, made sense. And of course, the county's already approved it. We're content with the conditions that have been posed here for the road widening because of the willingness of Mr. Chapin to go along with that. And we'd ask for approval of the proposal and appreciate the county's willingness to look at their procedures and policies, and in the event this comes along for some other applicant, because it was a surprise. There's no doubt about that.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Lefebvre. Is there any questions for Mr. Lefebvre from the committee? Okay, I don't see anybody with their hand up. So at this point, what I'd like to do is open this up to the public. And I'll ask our clerk, Adam, is there anybody here from the public that wishes to speak to this application?
Hi, Mr. Chair. No, there are no members of the public here to speak to this application.
Okay, thank you. And I'll ask a second time if there's anybody from the public that wishes to speak to this application. And I'll ask a third time if there's anybody from the public that wishes to speak to this application. Okay, seeing or hearing none, I'll close this part of the meeting off to the public, and we'll bring this back to the committee, and I'll ask the committee how they'd like to deal with this application, or if they wish to add any amendments. I'll go to Councillor Coleman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So move the recommendation.
Okay, seconder, Councillor Chambers, you had your hand up, or go ahead? Yeah, second it. Okay, perfect. Any discussions before we call the vote? Councillor Chambers.
Mr. Chairman, I'm almost tempted to amend the recommendation to eliminate the portion where it gives the reasons for approval. This is, again, something that has not been common in the past. We've approved the recommendations, but we've never, up until very recently, maybe even tonight, not included the reasons for approval in the recommendation. I'm just wondering, I can see at some point, not so much this application, but future applications may be problematic if we list the reasons. It's something we haven't done. Before I make that amendment, could I ask through you the staff's reasoning for the change in presenting the recommendations, which now encompass the reasons?
And just so everybody's aware, I think Councillor Chambers, you're referring to those reasons on page 43 of our package, just so everybody's on the same page. And there's 4 reasons for approval. So, and we'll turn Councillor Chambers' questions over to, well, it looks like Matt, you want to give this a go?
Yep. Through the chair to Councillor Chambers. I believe the change in the package this evening is to address formulating council's decision as part of the notice requirement.
Later, once this, if this gets approved through our council meeting later this month, as part of our statutory requirements, we have to give notice of the decision. This, having the reasoning in there helps the explanation part of that notice.
I understand that through you, Mr. Chairman, to Matt. I understand the reasons for the reasons, but I'm just anticipating some applications where the reasons that you are attaching to the recommendations, there may be other reasons why the committee is supporting the recommendation. So I won't make the amendment, but I may be inclined to do so in the future because some of the applications may have multiplicity of reasons for supporting the recommendations. These are the technical reasons you've listed here, but there may be other reasons as well. And when you list one, if you don't list another reason, then it tends to negate the entirety of the reasons. So I'm going to be asking for a policy discussion on that as well, but I'll second the motion and leave it at that.
Thank you. Any further discussion on this one as presented with the reasons in there? Okay, seeing none, I'll call the vote. All in favor? Opposed, if any? Okay. Mr. Lefebvre, just so you know, what happens is any decisions from tonight go to, as our Director of Planning said, to our council meeting later this month for final approval. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank
Okay, so that concludes basically section 8 for this evening. Now we have some staff reports of a more policy nature this evening, and I think everybody knows about these. So the first one we'll bring us is 9.1, and that's the official plan engagement. And Brandon actually has a small presentation, so I'm going to ask that Brandon do his presentation first, and then we'll get it on the floor, and then we'll open it up for questions or discussion. So, and Brandon, whenever you're ready, I think you've got 4 slides you're going to share with us. So whenever you're ready, go ahead.
All right. Thank you, Chair Miller. Through you to the committee, good evening, everyone. I'm just going to bring up my presentation here, so just bear with me one moment. All right, can everyone see that? Looks like we can. Okay. All right. So as Chair Miller mentioned, just a quick summary on this report. It's quite a lot of information, so I just thought I'd provide a very high-level summary for the committee and as well for the folks who might be watching this either now or later on YouTube. So this report is a summary of our engagement from this phase of the official plan project. This is our phase 2. It's called Engage with Us. Just as a caveat to that, just because this particular phase is called Engage with Us, I do want to make it very clear that each of the remaining phases will have a large engagement component to them. It's just that this particular phase is how we're getting kind of our foundation for our policy directions, along with other components like our land needs analysis, which you'll hear a bit more about from Jennifer and from our consultants at Watson a bit in the future. But this particular summary provides a bit more information on how we engaged with the public. So this particular phase, in light of COVID, we were able to have about 6 months of active engagement with the public and with stakeholders. We did this through a number of different ways, Engage Grant being one of the main ones too, that we were able to launch that in January. But prior to that, we had some other available engagement opportunities as well, along with the continued availability of staff. So we were always available by email or by phone, and when safe, we were available in the office as well. So you'll see here just a quick summary of some of the engagement opportunities that we were able to put out. And we did have a recent mail out as well that went out to each of the households in the County of Brant as an effort to go beyond just the digital engagement efforts that we're working on here. So who was it that engaged with us? So we're quite happy with the results that we've gotten so far. There's quite a good cross-section or demographic cross-section of the residents. Here's some highlights here. So 47% of the respondents are longtime residents of the county, have been in the county of Brant for 20 plus years. And about 60% were between the ages of 35 and 64. So we can see that there's kind of an older, we're getting towards an older population here in the county of Brant, which is very much in line with our demographics. And 59% of the folks who engaged with us identified Paris as their closest settlement, which makes a lot of sense. There's a lot of development going on in Paris, and that's a hot topic. So we were happy to hear from that cohort of folks. So some of the key trends, and these are also in the report and its attachments as well. The report kind of acts as a summary of the actual survey data that's there, and then this is kind of a summary of the summary, so to speak. So some of the key things that folks were talking about were slow and managed growth, with a kind of a concern for infrastructure planning. People want vibrant spaces, a broad range and mix of housing, with more modest and affordable housing options. That was a big one. A lot of the housing options that people kind of lean towards were preferences for lower rise housing, so 4 stories or less. We had some mention of requirements for building design, so to kind of guide development in a way where the building design honors common features of our area or common heritage features of our area, as well the desire for appropriate small scale commercial amenities in our new neighborhoods. So the idea of walkability, which is a common term. Improved access to our green spaces and connections between those natural features, so more trails, ways to bike or walk between those parks and natural areas. A science-based approach to protection for our environmental features, clear protection for agricultural lands, strong development policies that encourage climate change resilience. Like I mentioned, walkability, so opportunities to live and work in the same community was very popular. Having a mix of amenities within kind of the 15-minute walking or biking radius of most homes. And we recognize that obviously that's not always the case for the way that the geography of the county of Brant is laid out, but that was a desire that was noted. As well, the options for more land being available for business investment, producing more jobs in the county of Brant. You'll see here, I won't go through all of them, but focus on agriculture was a big one. Infrastructure was also, there were a lot of comments about that, including things like multi-use trails and active transportation, and more connections kind of between the settlements in the county of Brant. So each settlement be recognized with its own identity, but then having ways for folks to go between those settlements. So I'll leave it with that kind of short run through of a lengthy report. But with that, I'll maybe hand it back to Chair Miller, and if anyone has any questions or comments, I'm happy to field those at this time.
Okay, thanks, Brandon. I'll wait till you remove that. Hey, you didn't mention the comments about Costco in there. So any questions for Brandon from the committee? Okay, we'll go to Councillor House first.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, through you. Brandon, thanks very much. It's great information, and it's nice to see some market research data to support the informal impressions that we get from residents about these issues. Some people hold the perception that the majority of the county's population is located in Paris, and we've seen recent statistics that prove that is not the case. I see from some of the graphs within the report that we received that the majority of those who engaged with the surveys, the majority of the almost 800 people who participated in the surveys seem to be from Paris. So my question is, I'm wondering what we might do, and this question is rhetorical, but I'll get to another one, but I'm wondering what we can do to improve the reach and the participation from other areas of the county as we move ahead to the other stages of this process that you said do continue to have engagement. I do love the opportunities presented by the Engage Brant platform, and I'm confident that the 220 active participants that engaged with that process, I'm confident that we'll see some growth in those numbers too, because it's very new. I guess my question is, do you have access to any information to tell us how many residents were involved in the public engagement process of the last official plan, when obviously we weren't in a pandemic, when in-person engagement was possible, maybe technology wasn't as prevalent? I'm just wondering if we have any comparison on how many people engaged with the last official plan.
Okay, thank you, Councilor. You asked, I think you asked more than one question there. I know you asked how we can engage other residents outside of Paris better, and then you're asking how these compare to previous engagements. Was there any other questions buried in there?
No, and I will understand if they don't have an answer for the first one. That's a, you know, engaging with other parts of the county are important, but not necessarily something we can solve tonight.
Okay, yeah, but it's a good question though. Okay, go, Brandon, help us out if you can.
Sure. Through Chair Miller to Councillor House. So just for the first question, we are trying very actively to reach beyond Paris. I think because of the development situation in Paris, people are more keen to respond in that regard, but we're definitely actively looking at going beyond that. And there are a lot of other projects that are going to be taking place in our other settlements. So we'll be using that information as well in partnership with our operations folks and the engagement that they're doing for those projects. So we're trying our best to keep our foot in the door with those other projects to get beyond Paris as well. And then just to your note about the prior engagement with the OP, I might have to do a bit of digging for that one. But I do believe we have some files still from our previous OP. So we'll look that up and we can definitely provide some information on that point.
All right, thank you.
Okay, we'll go to, I think Councillor Gatward, you have your hand up, so we'll go to you next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you, Brandon, for your presentation. You mentioned that there was a mail out to all county residents. Can you show me or us what it looked like? Because I don't think I got one.
Is that possible or?
Did everyone get one?
So it was sent out to every household in the county of Brant. So we've actually done 2 of them. One was done in October, just prior to our town hall events. And then the one was most recently, it happened earlier in February, just to let folks know of the closing date. So that particular one was 2-sided. One side was dedicated to Engage Brant, and the other side was dedicated to the official plan project. I'm just looking here for it. I don't know if I have a PDF of it saved. Was it
a 8.5 by 11 sheet? Or
yeah. So it was an 8.5 by 11 mail out, double-sided. You would have seen it in the mailbox. Based on I would assume based on the Canada Post mailings throughout the county, it might have arrived at different times for folks, but it's definitely something we can send via email to you as well, just to show you what it did look like. I'm not too sure why it wouldn't have made it your way, but we could definitely look into that.
Yeah, because there's many addresses within the county, like you have to use the Caledonia post office to reach the people down in the eastern part of Onondaga, and you have to use, I think there's at least 5 or 6 different post offices to reach everybody in the county.
Yeah, and so the mail out went, sorry to interrupt, but the mail out went to, I think it was over 14,000 households in the county of Brant. So we did receive that verification from Canada Post.
Okay, thank you. And yeah, you can send me what it looked like. I'll ask my neighbors if they got one, because I don't recall seeing it. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Councillor Gatward. We'll go to Councillor Laferriere and then Councillor Bell.
Thanks so much, Chair Miller. Yeah, I definitely got mine and sort of my neighbors. But one thing I'm wondering, we often talk around this table about how, you know, while we might be assigned wards, we're councillors for the whole community. And something that strikes me very, very often, and this is through you, Mr. Chair, Brandon, are the amount of people in Paris who say, you know, the horse is out of the barn, and I wish we would have been as engaged as we are now 7 years ago, 10 years ago, whatever it might be, around some of these planning decisions and some of the development and the growth. And And I'm wondering, do you get a sense from going through the data that the folks in St. George understand that they're next? Right? That are they in that situation where they understand and are commenting in that way that they are going to be targeted by the development community for major growth in the next little while, and basically what I'm trying to do is trying to ask is that piece, and also how do we as a community, and this includes the residents, how do we avoid some of the growing pains that we had in Paris when it does come to St. George? Like, what have we learned from that process? What have residents learned? And are they aware of that need to pay more attention now? Because I'd hate to see the regrets that I do hear from longer term residents in Paris.
Brandon, do you want to give that a crack?
Sure. Through Chair Miller, to answer Councillor Verria's question. So I do see a bit of that. That St. George and longtime residents of the County of Brant in general are getting more engaged. And we're making more of those opportunities available to folks as well, which is great. It's definitely been hard with COVID. But I know with St. George specifically, and any of our areas that have servicing, development is kind of one of those things that's tied to servicing with the way that Ontario has their planning framework set up. So we'll definitely be chatting with those folks specifically in those communities, trying to find ways to inform them of how the studies that we're doing and the policies that we're creating will affect the growth, whether that be tomorrow or next year or 10 years from now. What we're doing is very long-term planning, but it will affect a lot of people, and it will affect people within our lifetime and beyond. So hopefully that kind of answers that question, but.
No, that does. And one other piece I wanted to ask for you, Mr. Chair, to Brandon. I do think this actually sums up what we hear anecdotally, as Councillor House mentioned, and actually what we see when people come to council, especially pages 164 and 165. I think that really does sum up the key trends and comments, what we've seen people say when they come and petition a council. I guess my question is related to that. Now that we have the Bang the Table software, the Engage Brant software, when we're doing the releases for information, when anybody speaks at council now and in the future, is it possible to have them, if they so choose, tick a box on all those forms saying, please sign me up for Engage Brant? And we could do it there, because it's like with voting. If you get people who are, when you're going to tip here for anybody in an election, people who vote are more likely to vote already. People who already vote, I should say, are more likely to vote in future elections. People who already have come to council are more likely to want to engage with us and do this. Is there a way we can almost auto do that the same way we talk about auto getting folks to register for voting, or auto donate your organs when you get the license? I have a feeling it'd be a good hit for us to continue to get input from across the county. I mean, even today, there's 4 or 5 people that could have been added to the list if we made it part of that process.
Can we fix that up? Engage Brant, Brandon?
That's through Chair Miller. That's definitely something we can chat with our communications folks about. So they're the ones that kind of control that new Engage Brant function. But I think, yeah, that's a great idea. And just as a quick plug to our own planning stuff, for folks that may be interested in signing up for regular circulations, we do have an email list. So if you go to brant.ca/planning projects, there is the opportunity to sign up for that. And with the official plan list specifically, we do send out monthly emails. So this information was provided, as well as how to directly connect to this meeting.
Thanks so much.
Okay, we'll go to Councillor Bell next. And
Yeah.
I see you, John, and John from Ward 1, and we'll get to you in a second.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to the planners. First of all, I want to say thank you. I think Brandon, the team have done a fabulous job of outreach. I think the content is terrific. I think the enthusiasm you've been able to maintain over a relatively long period is amazing. So I think what you put out was excellent. I think it was informative. And given the COVID-19 situation, it's very difficult to see how you could have done anything better. But there's a but. So my but is, despite the quality and the quantity and the importance of the content, we still only reached about 0.5% of the population. Now, that may be, and this is my first question, is that good, bad, or indifferent?
Go ahead, Brandon.
So I can definitely speak to that through the chair. So one of the things with engagement, it is tough to reach large amounts of people. And that's part of why we've looked at it from a bit of a weighted perspective as well, noting the demographic representations of the county, knowing that maybe we will only receive 1 or 2% of active engagement from folks. And not saying that that's the best we can do, but that it's definitely something that can help us look at it from a perspective that, or looks at it from a way that puts it into perspective. And with any engagement function, and as we're finding as we do this project as well, there's always ways to improve. And COVID has definitely kind of thrown a wrench into everything. But I think we're satisfied as staff with the kind of demographic, the cohorts and the cross sections that we've received, at least with this information. But we do take that with a grain of salt, knowing that it doesn't necessarily represent each person individually. But we are looking out for kind of the best interest of the residents of the County of Brant in general.
Thank you, Brian. But in the planning world, which you're familiar with, is 0.5% a good measure? Is there a best practice indicator?
Generally speaking, from my limited knowledge, at least in this, 0.5% to 1% is pretty good, especially I think in light of what's happening with COVID. I think we've done pretty all right with the County of Brant, and we're proud that folks have gotten involved. So it's great.
As I say, I'm delighted with it anyway. But let me ask another question. Of the responses you got, there's still an undertone of people who say we don't want to grow. Stop the growth. There seems to still be an unwillingness to accept the reality of provincial diktats on population growth and focus on urban settlements for the majority of that growth. What suggestions do you have for us as a council to help get that message across more clearly and get people on a, let's say, a real path towards understanding what's coming?
That's a great question. So through the chair, I think one of the key pieces here will be, from all of us, will be information and informing the general public of kind of the tactics and ways that we can control and manage the growth that comes our way. So you'll hear some more information about our land needs analysis shortly, about some of those opportunities. So whether we expand or choose not to expand settlement boundaries, putting implementation tools into place afterwards that control what our development looks like more so. Just being keen and active about the types of policies that we're putting in place. And that is a learning piece for everyone. And I think policy itself is not everyone's cup of tea, so to speak. So when we say, oh, the policy is important and people need to become actively involved with it, it's a bit hard to sell it to folks that way. But I think as we see the development that happens and we start to say, okay, yeah, we like this portion, but we don't like this portion. And we can pick and choose kind of what's working for us and what isn't. That's probably the best place to put our energy to try and move forward with that, is to try and control it the best we can and manage it the best we can that way.
Okay, big task, I understand. Final comment, if I may. There's tons of great data in that, particularly in the narrative section. And I think that should inform some of the choices we make, and some of the strong and unsurprising messages need to be reflected back in the final official plan. So well done again.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Bell. We will go to Councillor McAlpine. You had your hand up earlier, John.
Yeah, no, I was just going to comment along with what Mark DeFerry was saying, that I think it was a good representative of the comments that I've been getting in our ward. And I think pretty well everybody's kind of aware that it's coming, and they've been watching Paris and seeing how that's been handled, and then how that's going to reflect on how things are handled in St. George. And there's a mix of people. I think some people are sort of just realize it's going to happen, and we can do the best we can to manage the growth and make it fit into the flavor that we have now and expand upon that. And overall, I think he did a good job. So,
okay, thank you, Councillor McAlpine. Councillor Wheat.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair, to help Brandon and Councilor LaFerriere. The previous official plan that we did, it took a long time. In fact, it ran over 2 terms of council, but there was many open houses held throughout the county. I distinctly remember the one at the Paris Fairgrounds in the original building there. It was jam-packed that night. And we had a great turnout here in St. George, and we had out in Canesville, we had a good turnout there. We also had a great turnout in Burford, but it took a long time, and there was many, I can't give you an exact number, but I'm guessing at least 7 or 8 different open houses throughout the county with different display boards up so that everybody had an opportunity to comment. And I would say probably more people participated then because you could do it in person, whereas today it's a little bit different in how it's handled. But there was lots of participation from the public years ago. And the people in St. George are certainly well aware of the growth that is coming here.
Okay, thank you, Councilor. Any other questions for Brandon at this time? Councilor Chambers.
Thank you, Chairman David. I'm not going to be critical of the report. It's an excellent report, and it's well done. If I was going to make some constructive criticism about engagement, I would put it this way. A lot of the focus has been not only on our official plan, but in many things, growth and development and what's happening in Paris and the urban areas, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that's all well and good. And we have to have an official plan that reflects the trends and the future in those areas for sure. And we may have be rightly criticized for maybe having shortcomings in that in the past. But one of the things that we don't seem to be focusing on, in my opinion, in this official plan, both in terms of what we're putting forward and in terms of engaging the people, is what's happening in the rural areas. Everybody says that the urban areas are changing. Well, let me tell you, the rural areas are changing just as much in different ways than the urban areas. Agriculture in the Brant County, and Councillor Coleman will, I'm sure, agree with me on this, has changed dramatically in the last 10 years. We don't have the small family farms. We don't have the little tobacco farms. We don't have a lot of farms. The age of farmers is getting higher and higher and higher. The size of agricultural operations are now in the 2,000 and 3,000 and 4,000 acres, not the 50 acres. We alluded to some of that in the future application. And our official plan needs to reflect changes that are happening in the agricultural areas, in the rural areas as well. On my road, when I was growing up, everybody lived on the farm and they worked on their farm. They were 100-acre farms from one end of the road to the other for 2 miles. Today, there are only 2 farmers that are actively farming living on that road. Farms are rented out. Farms are blocks where there are no residences because the surplus dwellings have been taken off. And I'm telling you, if you don't recognize the changes that are happening in the rural areas, you are shortchanging an updated official plan of Brant County. So maybe staff can comment on that rant in the following ways. How is the agricultural community in the rural areas being reflected in terms of engagement and in terms of making our official plan pertinent and relevant to the rural areas as much as they are in the urban areas?
Brandon.
Thank you for that question. That's a great question as well, and through the chair. So there are quite a few components to the way that we're looking at our agricultural policies. We're working directly with OMAFRA, with the province. We will be working with our Ag Advisory Committee, with the Brant County Federation of Agriculture, kind of some of those kind of key stakeholders that will have some good input for us about the how, why, where, what of agricultural operations in the county. One of the things we've recently done is with on-farm diversified uses and agricultural related uses, so allowing kind of smaller farms to find ways to diversify their farm options and opportunities. And then we're also looking at other opportunities for large farm holdings in the county that may have large swaths of land that are being rented out, like you say. So there are a lot of kind of facets to that. We will be doing kind of specifically a village boundary review as well, just to make sure that our kind of smaller hamlets and villages are all as they need to be. And we are doing kind of it's called an agri-food network or agricultural systems mapping exercise as well, to make sure that operations or agricultural operations in the area have appropriate resources available to them. So suppliers, folks that might do storage, minor processing, those types of things, to make sure those connections are available in those areas so that they can function and grow. It's been very clear, at least with our comments, that agriculture is a large component of the identity here in the county, and we know that from driving around our area. So that's definitely a key portion of our considerations for this official plan. And you, I think, see a bit more of that as we get into the specific policy direction phase with this, but hopefully that provides kind of an overview of where we are with that.
Is that okay, Councillor Chambers? Good with that? Okay. Thank you, Brandon. Any other questions before I go for a second time? Councillor Goward, go ahead, second time.
Thank you. I just wanted to reiterate something that Councillor Wheaton Ferrier mentioned, and Councillor Ferrier referred to 10 or 15 years ago if we'd engaged with the public. Well, yes, we did engage, and as Councillor
that's not what I said.
Oh, hold on, we're not going to get into crosstalk, but I think he was asked. I think what Councillor Ferrier is, and you can correct me, is he was asking how well did they engage last time versus how well they're engaged that time. I think he understands that they engaged. That there's no question about that.
Yes,
No,
and I agree with
again,
Councillor.
that's not what I said. I said that people regretted not being more engaged. Not that the counselor or the council or staff didn't engage them, but the people said they were sleeping on this, some folks, and didn't realize what an important issue and how they could have engaged earlier. No blame was laid.
Yeah, I appreciate that clarification, because I took your comments the same as Councillor Wheat, because we did engage and we held meetings in Mount Pleasant, all around the county, to get as much input from rural and urban sectors of the county as we could. And it was a lengthy process, and the plan for Southwest Paris has taken forever to build out because the economy had a downturn. But now that it's happening, a lot of people are surprised with what it looks like. And the consultants of the day came up with this particular plan because the government wanted intensification, and the province is our master, and we have to listen to their places to grow and provincial policy statements. And so it makes it hard to balance that with the wishes of the public, because people move to the country and the small charming town of Paris because they like it there, and they don't want to live in a Brantford or a Milton or London. And so whether we like it or not, we were made a place to grow, and we have to deal with it. So those are my comments, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Goward. Mayor Bailey has his hand up. Councillor Ferrier, did you want to respond first?
Yeah, just to clarify too, I mean, I was a 20-something-year-old at some of those places to grow meetings, and I was the only one in my age demo there. So I understand how people can be in their 40s now and say, how did this happen? Because, you know, folks do sleep on this, and we see, you know, we could have a budget consultation and we're happy 20 people show up, and other communities, they'd be ecstatic if 20 people showed up because only 3 show up in much bigger communities. So again, people do sleep on this stuff because it's policy, and it's not, they don't know how to access it, even though they know how to talk about it and they have opinions. But again, no blame was being laid. It's just, I think a lot of people, there are a lot of people today who 10 years from now will say, where were we when this official plan was being created? And I think that's just the nature of this sort of policy work.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you. Mayor Bailey, you had your hand up.
Now, through you, Mr. Chair, I just wanted to take this opportunity to thank Brandon too. It was a great report. And I think Councillor Chambers is right. The whole look of the county is changing. Some for the better, some not so good. But I mean, it is changing, and we will roll with the punches. Brandon, maybe if you could work on that rural piece, because I think it was, now that Councillor Chambers has brought that up, that's the only place the report could have been a little weak, but it certainly wasn't a weak report. A lot of work, a rough situation, rough times. So thank you for all you've done. Thank you, Councillor.
Okay, thank you, Mayor Bailey. Any other questions for Brandon at this time? I see none. I want to go back to what Brandon just said at the start. Keep in mind, he's presenting to us, the planning committee, but there are people that are interested in what's happening with their comments and their input. So I think we're presenting this information to educate, and with the mindset that there might be another audience of the general public that's interested in this stuff. And going back to what a lot of the people are saying around this table, I would be interested to know, and it's no fault of Brandon. I mean, people, you know, like Councilor Ferrier says, they maybe they don't know in their 20s, but then 10 years later they realize they should be involved. And I question how many young people even are cognizant of what municipality they are in half the time, or if they even are aware. I know quite a few aren't. And I also know, speaking of the rural areas, we know from Heather's report that the numbers keep growing in the various, you know, the Ward 1, the Ward 5, the Ward 4s. And I've been on council for almost 12 years, and I keep waiting for the Paris numbers to get up to our voter numbers, and they never do, because ours keep growing as Paris does, but they never seem to quite catch up. But I did read a statistic that said something like 90% of the people that live in the rural areas are non-farmers. So that's a trend that's been going on for a while. So I do appreciate Councillor Chambers bringing that up, and I think we need to address that. So, okay, so we've all been around the table. Councillor Gatward, third time, last time, go ahead.
Thank you,
Make
Mr.
it important.
Chair. This is something that I didn't mention, and it's, oh, wait a minute, I'm on to Jennifer's report. Forget it, wrong report.
Okay, can I get a motion on the floor to receive this report for information? Moved by Councillor House, second by Councillor Wheat. All in favor? Okay, Brandon, thank you very much. And this will bring us to, hold on a second here. This will bring us up to staff report 9.2, and Jennifer Boyer is going to present this. And at the same time, we have 9.2.1, and that's a presentation from Jamie Cook and Brad Post of Watson Associates. They're here as well. What we're going to do, we've decided, is let Jennifer give her presentation. It's very short. And before we go into moving the recommendation before us, we're going to actually go on to the Cook presentation, which is about 30 minutes. What I'm going to ask you to do is let them speak. Let them go through their entire presentation. If you have any questions, write them down, okay? Just once they get on a roll, sometimes it's not good, I find anyways, to be interrupted. So we'll start with Jennifer. Jennifer will do her presentation, and then she'll introduce Watson Associate presenters. They'll do their thing, and then we'll have a roundtable discussion at the end, okay? So Jennifer, I'll turn it over to you.
All right, thank you very much, Chair Miller, and thank you very much, members of committee, for being here tonight. As Chair Miller said, we do have a presentation by Watson and Associates, and this is on our community area land needs assessment. So I'll just take a couple minutes to introduce a few slides, but also where we are in the process at the moment. We're here basically tonight for a preliminary analysis. I've been fielding quite a few calls and emails in the last few days on this work. And if you remember back in November 2019, when we had the official plan launch, and also during our workshops and through the process, is we promised that we would come before a draft of the MCR is done and also our final with some digestible chunks. And even though this is a very large package tonight, it's a lot of information. It's a preliminary analysis of a look forward of where we are in the county at the moment and where we're going to our forecasted growth plan amount to 2051. So where we are right now is this report tonight is for information, your analysis and direction. I'll take a couple minutes to just introduce a few slides, but we also have senior staff on the line. Pam Dusling, General Manager of Development Services, and myself are here. Matt Vaughn, Director of Development Services, is here. We also have Rob Walton, General Manager of Operations, on the call. So if there are any different questions that you have at the end, we do have staff available. And then Jamie Cook and Brad Post from Watson and Associates will be presenting and available for lots of questions at the end. So, so basically, I'm just going to start sharing my screen in a moment, and I'll run through the introduction of the presentation. But really what we're here is the information presented to you tonight. We do have some recommendations for discussion in terms of our community area residential land needs. And then I'll get into a little bit more about where we're going in the next few months. As you know, we don't have a lot of time. Attached to the report tonight was a very timely letter from the Ontario Growth Secretariat. And if you read the third paragraph of that letter, it talked about the conformity date. If any of you, I know that Councillor Laferriere and Councillor Howes were in discussion with Halton Hills in the last few weeks, and they may elaborate on that in the meeting for discussion, but it's a very different scenario in the rest of the Greater Golden Horseshoe for many municipalities. That letter was timed. It's basically telling municipalities you have to get this done basically by the end of the year to be in conformity. But I think, as it's been said many times, is we are embarking in a new official plan. We have a great opportunity here. This is the first time a new OP has been done in quite some time. It's a process that I think is very important, that you're all engaged, and in the fact that we can get a new official plan approved, which is potentially non-appealable, which is a big thing for us. So we're striving to meet that time frame, but it's going to be a lot of information. So I thank you very much for your patience on this. So I will start sharing my screen if that's all right with you. Can everyone see my screen right now?
Yeah, you're good, Jennifer.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay. All right, I'm just having some technical difficulty. Yeah, I need them to the screen.
Can we ask questions now?
I'm a planner, but I'm not great at technology. What can I say? So, all right, so we'll begin. So All right, so the first thing is with our preliminary analysis for our residential and community land needs. As I mentioned, it's generated quite a bit of discussion because this is a game changer for the county. Some of the information that's being presented tonight. We're at the process of our municipal comprehensive review, as you know. This is sort of the technical analysis that forms part of the official plan in accordance with Section 26 of the Planning Act. And I've explained a lot of this before in many of our presentations of what this is. And it's really a driver of what's as part of the growth plan. It's part of our review process in terms of our long-term vision and planning framework. And as you know, this digestible chunks pieces, the first part in December 8th, when I came to you for the growth forecasting, is part of our land needs assessment framework. The methodology from the province was attached to the document. It was revised last year. And that process also forms our residential component, then our employment lands, and there's also our housing analysis, and there's a bunch of technical pieces that go into this as we've explained. So it's a very important component, as is tonight's report and the information contained in it. So basically this report tonight, the purpose of this presentation and the report is we are discussing some modifications to the rural and urban area growth allocations. December 8th, for you, those of you who remember before Christmas, we did talk a lot about growth allocations, where and how we should grow. And also based on further feedback and looking at some new numbers, what does that mean tonight? We're also looking at determining different intensification housing targets within built-up areas. And also what is our designated greenfield area? So the vacant land that exists in settlement areas, we have to have a density target. The province tells us that target, but we can change that. And this report talks about that as well. And then we look at basically our whole entire community area land needs, whether there's sufficient land or not. And also, can we accommodate that forecasted growth to 2051? And as I said, a lot of municipalities in the greater Golden Horseshoe are looking at massive expansions to the urban settlement area boundaries. And this report does paint a different picture, if you will. And I think the county is in a very fortunate position, and we'll discuss that tonight. So we've talked a lot about this land needs methodology. Tonight we're talking specifically about residential and housing and where people will live. Next month's report, coming in April, we'll talk about employment lands. Also, not only just that, the long-awaited employment strategy with Alison Newton's group. We'll be presenting that probably at a special meeting of council. Our employment land needs and also the employment land conversion requests that the county has received to date and what that means in terms of those submissions. And as part of the last presentation in December when I came to you, and the difference of what this is tonight is Jamie and Brad will go over the information and the technical analysis, but the last presentation talked about forecasting population and employment over the planning horizon. These are these growth scenarios that the province has sort of given us and what makes sense. And then we talked about the housing type. That was that attached document in terms of how to accommodate the population, where will it go? And then just the growth allocations, where we will grow, how, and the numbers associated with that. But this presentation and for tonight, we're looking at the revision to growth allocations, and as I mentioned, our intensification and our designated greenfield areas, and also our land supply. How much land is left? The provincial policy statement and also our planning documents say that we do have to have a land supply up to 25 years, and also the infrastructure capacity up to 3 years to accommodate growth. So it's looking at all these different numbers. So Brandon just showed me this timeline. We've been stuck in phase 2 engage with us for about a year now, mostly because of COVID, but just also in terms of where we're heading. We are moving into phase 3 now, which is our proposed policy directions. But as Brandon mentioned, we will never stop engaging our public, our stakeholders, the development industry, and our Indigenous communities as well. So as we move on, we don't have a lot of time to get this done, but we're confident that we'll have the information for you to make a good decision. So on that note, I'm going to turn it over to Jamie Cook and Brad Post of Watson and Associates, and they will lead you through the presentation for the next probably about 20 or 30 minutes.
Thank you very much, Jennifer. And good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of committee. It's a pleasure to be able to speak before you on this important matter tonight. So I'm going to go through the first half of the presentation, and then Brad's going to speak about intensification, then I'm going to pick it back up at the end on the urban land requirements. So as Jennifer pointed out, tonight we're just speaking about the what we call the community area, or the residential component of the urban land needs within Brant County, and we'll be speaking about employment lands at the next venue. Before I jump into a lot of the core analysis, I wanted to start off with this slide, which just focuses a bit on the urban structure of the county, specifically here focusing on Paris as an example. As you know, the county is made up of a collection of urban and more rural settlement areas, primary, secondary, and settlement areas and villages and hamlets. The focus of the official plan, as Jennifer's pointed out, is really about all of the urban rural system, and so is our analysis, the growth and economic work that we've done. But when we look at the overall land budgeting work, I just want to be clear that the land needs assessment methodology really only focuses on what we call the urban system. And so it's focusing on these urban lands within primary settlement areas. And in Brant County, you have two primary areas that are a focus for the land budgeting work. The first is the Paris area, and the second is St. George. So I just wanted to note that while we will be allocating growth to the rural areas outside of and secondary settlement areas outside of these primary areas, the core quantification work, the detailed work, is focusing on Paris and St. George. When we look at the urban settlement areas, there's two main components in the urban area. There's community areas, which is the area that's identified in this creamy sort of yellow color. Those are all the areas where people live, as well as where you see retail and service-related jobs in institutional and commercial services, and also work at home. The blue areas are what we call employment areas. These are your areas where you would accommodate industrial type businesses, as well as employment supportive businesses to industrial uses. It could also include things like ancillary retail and commercial uses as well. So we're going to focus primarily on the yellow areas tonight. The blue will be the focus of the next meeting. Next slide. So wanted to just get into the update of what we heard from you last time when we spoke with respect to the allocations. And on the next slide, you'll see we have made some adjustments to the urban rural allocations. So again, when we talk about the urban area, we're really talking here about Paris and St. George, the rural areas, all remaining areas. Our previous allocation was 89% urban, 11% rural. We've made some adjustments to that forecast based on what we've heard and based on background work to an 80% urban split, 20% rural split. So we've increased the rural growth based on another look at historical trends and anticipated demands within the rural area, and revise that allocation accordingly. And on the next slide, you'll see some of the specific adjustments. So the first adjustment I wanted to point out is in the rural area. We've increased the overall annual growth rate by 25 units per year. So we've actually doubled the amount of growth outside of Paris and St. George, reflecting that anticipated demand. And as a result, we've slightly reduced the amount of growth that's being allocated to Paris and St. George, from about 165 to 145 units a year in Paris, and from about 60 units a year to about 55 units a year in St. George. I did want to point out that we do note that there are some wastewater servicing constraints in St. George that could potentially limit the amount of population and employment growth allocated to St. George over the planning horizon of the growth plan, which is looking at 2051. And so that could result in further refinements of the growth allocations by urban and rural area if required, potentially through this review or through a subsequent review. Next slide. So just to sum up the overall impact on the changes, we've taken the allocation from Paris down from 68% to 60%, St. George from 24% to 20, and then the rural area from 9 to 20. So before we get into the details of the intensification analysis and the land needs, I want to just spend a few minutes on the broader provincial policy context on slide 12. So we talked about this context last time. For those who weren't at the meeting, or just for a quick refresh, there are 3 primary documents that we're looking at the overall official plan and land needs analysis for Paris at the provincial level. So those 3 documents are the provincial policy statement and the growth plan, which was amended last year and provides long-term direction for growth to 2051, as well as this land needs assessment methodology that was noted here on the right, that was updated in 2020 at the same time that Amendment 1 to the growth plan came out. And as I noted before, the land needs assessment methodology provides a consistent approach or overall approach that all municipalities within the Greater Golden Horseshoe are required to follow when looking at urban land needs requirements out to 2051. It is a less prescriptive methodology than what was presented by the former Liberal government. So there's a little more leeway for municipalities to work within when looking at long-term land requirements, but this does provide the overall guidelines for how we plan. And as Jennifer mentioned, we are required to have the official plan approved by July of 2022 and to conform with the official plan, to conform with the growth plan. And once that official plan has been approved by the minister, there is no right of appeal to LPAT. Next slide. So in terms of the existing policies that are in place in the Brant County official plan regarding these 2 key policies of intensification and community area density, the overall density target is 15%, and for intensification, and the community land needs, the community DGA density target is 40 people and jobs per hectare. So all those areas that identified in that yellow area have to achieve an overall density. All the lands that are both all the occupied and vacant lands, 2051, those lands, the lands that are developed will have to reach that average of 40 people and jobs per hectare. The growth plan requires that we at least achieve these minimum targets that are currently identified in the official plan to date. However, we can look at this and make recommendations in this official plan update if we want to adjust these targets in the official plan update. So these are the current targets, and we're going to be looking at the proposed targets tonight. Next slide. So drilling down a little bit further into the urban area, this slide here shows in the dark blue what we call the built-up area. So the province identified in 2006 through their initial growth plan the area that was built at the time the growth plan came out, and they drew a line around those built-up areas within existing urban settlement areas. They identified that as the built-up area, and then that's the geographic extent to where intensification is required, and where it's basically identified to contribute to the intensification, regardless of whether it's true infill or not. Any development within this built-up area in dark purple counts towards this intensification target that I just mentioned. In the light purple, you'll see here, these are the areas that are within in this case, Paris settlement area. They're in the urban area boundary, but they're outside of the built-up area. Most of these lands are still vacant, but are designated for development. The areas that are in light purple are designated for community area development, which would be a combination of residential and commercial uses. Those lands that are identified in the blue, again, are the employment areas that we'll be looking at later in the next presentation next month. Next slide. So this is just another map of the St. George urban settlement area. Again, the dark purple areas being the built-up area, the light purple areas being the designated greenfield area, and the blue area being the employment area. Next slide. So I just wanted to also emphasize that the growth plan was released as an outcome of Bill 108, which is the More Homes, More Choice Act. And really the impetus for this act was to address the province's housing supply issues and potentially deal with housing shortages that were being identified at the time when the Conservative government came into power. The growth plan builds on the direction from this act of more choice, more homes, more choice in the supply action plan, housing supply action plan. It emphasizes that the growth plan take an intensification first approach to development, focusing on existing infrastructure and better use of public services. It also focuses on the development of complete communities between people and jobs, but it also emphasizes that municipalities take a market-based approach when looking at supply and accommodate a broad range of housing choice across a diversification of demographic groups of all incomes and all ages. Next slide. I'm going to turn over to Brad. He's going to provide an overview of our intensification analysis.
Great, thank you, Jamie. So I'll briefly discuss the intensification component. Next slide, please. Thank you. So the dark purple on the map represents the built-up area. St. George and Paris both have a built-up area. And so, as Jamie noted, the built-up area was a line that was drawn by the province, representing the area that was built up as of 2006. So anything outside the built-up area within the urban boundary is considered the designated greenfield area. So the light purple is the designated greenfield area, and the dark purple is the built-up area. So within the built-up area, we have an intensification target. So the minimum housing intensification target for Brant, according to the growth plan, is to maintain or improve upon the target currently in the county's official plan, which is 15%. This means, at a minimum, the county has to plan for at least 15% of its total housing growth annually within the built-up area. The calculation of the intensification rate is generally the amount of housing growth forecast within the built-up area over the total housing forecast for Brant. And so the time frame we use to calculate this intensification target is 2022 to 2051. And 2022 is the start period, that this is the period that we assume that the official plan will be enacted or approved. Next slide. So the growth plan requires municipalities to take an intensification approach to planning for growth. Further, as previously noted, the intensification target is a minimum. As such, we are required to look at the intensification potential and determine if we can actually raise that intensification target. So there are three main drivers of intensification potential: an aging population looking to downsize or relocate from the rural area to the urban area, housing affordability, so a shift to smaller units. Some individuals may only require a one-bedroom unit. And finally, lifestyle preferences. Some individuals may prefer the option to live in walkable communities with amenities close by. It's important to recognize that there are different forms of intensification. Intensification opportunities are much more broader than simply just accommodating apartments. Intensification opportunities include secondary units, so units added to an existing home, running out of subdivisions, opportunity for development on a vacant remnant parcel in a subdivision, development on an underutilized site, and an opportunity to sever a lot or redevelopment on a site, and also including adding additional residential uses to commercial sites. Next slide, please. This slide here provides an example of some recent examples of intensification within Brant. So here we have a few examples. The first here is a repurposed building for apartments. And then we have three examples of a townhouse infill development. Next slide, please. So this slide here provides a summary of intensification activity within the last 5 years. So, and by the type of by the housing type within the built-up area. So over the 2016 to 2021 period, the county has averaged about 69 housing units annually within the built-up area of Paris and St. George. And if we could do a breakdown of that, about 62% included townhouses, and 28% single and semi-detached, and 10% apartments. It's important to note that the singles and semi-detached within the built-up area, which comprised just under a third, these units were primarily units accommodated through remaining phases of subdivisions that started prior to 2006. So as noted earlier, the built-up boundary was created by the province, a line drawn based on areas that were primarily developed as of 2006. And so some of these subdivisions that started in 2006 still had remaining phases left. And so then now they're being picked up in this historical period. Next slide, please. So in terms of the intensification potential, we have basically two categories. So basically on the left, we have summarized the intensification opportunities into two categories. So the first category includes housing units that are currently in the planning process. So those are approved or under review. And these units represent about 1,200 housing units. The category on the right, these are additional intensification opportunities. And through the assistance of Brant County planning staff, we created this second category, which identified further intensification opportunities based on a review of infill and redevelopment opportunities within Paris and St. George. And based on a review of these opportunities, the built-up area of St. George and Paris could accommodate a range of 2,800 to 4,900 additional housing units. Next slide, please. And so when we looked at that second category, additional opportunities for intensification that are not in the planning process, we had a criteria working with the County of Brant planning staff. And so first we looked at underutilized and redevelopment potential sites that are 5 hectares and larger. We looked at infill sites near arterial roads and proximity to the downtown core. We also considered constraints for further development, including the downtown sub-area in Paris referred to as the flats, which has a regulatory flood level is a special policy area. And then once we identified the sites, we assigned a unit yield range of 40 to 70 units per hectare. Next slide, please. This slide here provides an illustration of the intensification potential within the urban area of Paris. The orange sites identify those active intensification development sites that are in the planning process, so they're approved or they're under review. The pink sites identify intensification potential sites that we identified as further intensification potential. And as you can see on this map here for the urban area of Paris, these sites are quite large. Next slide, please. And similarly, we did the same thing for St. George. And so here we also identified the active intensification development sites and the other intensification potential sites. Next slide, please. So how is the county tracking with respect to housing intensification? Well, over the 2016 to 2021 period, approximately 29% of the housing growth has been within the built-up area, which exceeds the 15% intensification target set in the OP, that's currently set in the OP. While the county is tracking high, it's important to note that the time period is based on a very short time period. So we're looking at only a few years, 5 years, but we're forecasting out 30 years. As previously noted, a lot of the recent intensification that has happened has been some subdivision activity that has occurred, remaining subdivisions that have finished up that were subdivisions that started prior to 2006. Next slide, please. This slide here provides a a summary of the built up area forecast, so the intensification forecast by area. And so we broke, in this table, we include Paris, St. George, the total urban area, the rural area, and the county-wide. So what we're recommending, overall, we're recommending that the county plan for 20% of housing growth within the county annually. This would involve increasing the current intensification target from 15% to 20%. As shown, about 30% of the housing growth within Paris would be accommodated within the built-up area, while 11% of the housing growth within St. George would be accommodated within the built-up area. So basically what this table is showing that is that 30% of housing growth within Paris will be accommodated within the built-up area, 11% of the housing growth within St. George will be accommodated within the built-up area, and then overall, that represents 20% of the county-wide housing growth that's going to be accommodated within the built-up area. Next slide, please. And so again, here we just provide another summary of the housing forecast by policy areas, the built-up area, designated greenfield area, and the rural area. And the dark purple represents the built-up area. And so 20% overall of the housing growth within the built-up area, we're forecasting out from 2022 to 2051. And if we do a further breakdown, that means 18% of the housing growth within the Paris, 18% of the housing growth will occur within the Paris built-up area and 2% within the St. George built-up area. And then as a reference here, we include the other components of the county. So 42% of housing growth within the county will occur within the Paris designated greenfield area, 20% within the St. George designated greenfield area, and then 18% within the rural area. Next slide, please. So we're forecasting a demand for about 1,400 housing units within the built-up areas of St. George and Paris. This would include a range of housing opportunities, including ground-oriented housing, so townhouses and singles and semi-detached. And based on a review of the intensification opportunities within the built-up area, there is more than enough supply to accommodate this demand. So that concludes the intensification portion. I'll hand it over to Jamie, who's going to talk about the designated greenfield area.
Thanks, Brad. So we're going to switch gears now to talk about the greenfield area. And on the next slide, it's going to start off with discussing again what this area is. It's again this area that we mentioned in the light purple outside of the built-up area. In this example, looking at the Paris urban settlement area. And the current policy is to plan for an average of 40 people and jobs to this area. Next slide. So we looked at the overall amount of supply within the DGA, both within Paris and St. George. The key takeaway in this slide is that most of the lands within the DGA are not developed at this point. About 88% of the lands in the DGA are still vacant. There's a total of that total amount of supply. There's 739 gross hectares of DGA land within the combined areas of Paris and St. George at this time. So the portion that is developed is, including undeveloped parkland, is about 12%, and then we have 44% in active and vacant registered, approved and registered but unbuilt plans, 16% in proposed application, and then 27% in additional DJ lands that don't have any active applications. But there is a lot of growth that is currently in active plans, about 60% of the overall DJ supply. Next slide. So the province has a prescriptive approach to how we identify the developable land within the DGA. We're not going to get into all the details, but it's important to note that there are certain lands that are included and certain lands that are excluded. What's included is all the designated residential, commercial, and institutional lands that are vacant and developed. So all the developable designated lands. It also includes local roads, local infrastructure like stormwater ponds, pumping stations, as well as parks, trails, and open space. That's all counted in the density calculation. What's excluded is employment areas, those areas in blue that we talked about, the natural heritage system. So any significant environmental features are typically excluded from the developable land area. Major arterial roads, railways and highways are excluded. Utility corridors and cemeteries are also excluded from that calculation. Next slide. So this just provides a bit of an example of two recently developed communities, with one within Paris, one within St. George, to give you a bit of an idea of what the densities look like. So on this first example, you'll see an example in South Paris. This is Cobblestone Drive and Rest Acres Road. This area is about, they're both about the same size, around 45 gross hectares in size. This area includes a mix of grade-related type uses, residential uses, including single, semi-detached, and townhome units. It also includes other commercial and retail institutional uses, some large open space and parkland areas. It's coming in at an average density of about 44 people and jobs per hectare. Its lot size is 465 square meters per lot. And I know it's tough to deal in those numbers. I'm going to deal with another slide that'll help put that in a bit of context. The site to the right, this is an example of a residential area in Northeast St. George. It's also about that same size, about 45 gross hectares. It's largely comprised of single detached residential units with a fire hall, water tower, and some open space and parkland. It's coming in at a density much lower at about 32 people and jobs per hectare. Just to give you a bit of an idea what density looks like from an aerial view. We also looked at some information that was provided by the Ministry of Municipal Affairs in terms of looking at trends and lot sizes across the outer ring of the Greater Golden Horseshoe. And it was interesting to see that the densities are coming up. And it's no surprise. Average lot sizes are coming down. And so this is where it gets, I think, sort of interesting here is when you look at what's been happening in recent years. Average lot sizes in the outer ring are coming in at an average of 429 square meters per lot, or 4,600 square feet per lot. That's pretty close to what that Paris example was that we just looked at. Putting that into a lot size, that could work out to an average lot size of 46 by 100 in terms of a dimension. When we look at St. George, the average lot size was 700 square meters per lot. That's closer to what we would have seen on average in the outer ring in the late 80s and mid 90s. So clearly the densities are lower in St. George, but we would expect they will gradually rise over time. Next slide. So we also looked more broadly at the entire county to see, well, what is the existing density today? What are the densities of the development in the pipeline, and then what would that average be? And so today we're looking at an average density as of 2020 of about 39 people and jobs per hectare. So we're tracking just a little bit below the overall official plan requirement. But interesting to see is that that pipeline, which was about 60% of the overall DGA, is coming in at an average density of 54 people and jobs per hectare. So it is coming in quite a bit denser. And when we average the two together of approved and developed, we get an average of about 52 people and jobs per hectare. Next slide. So just to provide you another visual about what density looks like, this is an example from a report that was prepared by the Ontario Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing, and it just shows you a hypothetical streetscape of 50 people and jobs per hectare. And for me, the key takeaway from this is that we can achieve 50 people and jobs per hectare pretty much through grade-related housing. It would likely require some medium density households as well, like townhomes, for example, but we don't really need a lot of high density housing to achieve 50 people and jobs. When I look at the overall densities that are being achieved today in the outer ring and in the GTHA and what's being planned, it appears to me that the province has set the bar fairly low when it comes to the overall average density, I will say, because the important thing to look at now is that they've taken the previous density target, included that employment land area that I mentioned, that area in blue. Those densities are very low, typically in employment areas. They've now removed that component of the urban structure from the density calculation. So we're just looking now at the average density for the community areas. So 50 people and jobs per hectare is a fairly achievable target, as you can see in your own pipeline, through a relatively grade-related type of urban density. Next slide. I more or less just described the slide in the previous discussion. So to wrap up, your minimum target in your official plan is 40. About 57% of the land area, just under 60% in the DGA is coming in at an average density of about 52 people and jobs per hectare. So recognizing these trends that are happening locally and the broader trends that we're seeing across the outer ring and inside the in the GTHA, we're suggesting that the county plan for a density at a minimum of 50 people and jobs per hectare. This, I think, is an appropriate density. It also would provide a greater utilization of your existing DGA lands and would reduce the needs for unnecessary urban expansions in the future into agricultural areas. So we're going to move on to now the crux of the DGA analysis, which is the needs. So on the next slide, on slide 40, looking at the 2051, this is how the overall growth is looking to occur between these policy areas of the built-up area, the DGA, and the rural area. And it was noted, I think, by one of the councillors earlier that a lot of the growth is in the rural area, and a lot of the existing, I should say, population is in the rural area. And you can see that here on this slide that it is a large component, and the built-up area also represents a large component. The DGA represents about an initial 14,000 additional people that we'd be accommodating over this, in this case, the 35-year period. And overall, that represents about an additional 4,400 additional units that we would be planning for over that time period. So on the next slide, when we put this together, this is how the calculation essentially works in calculating density and the ultimate need for land demand in this case. So we start off with the existing population and jobs in the DGA, which again, the jobs are only including the community area jobs like retail and commercial and work at home. There's 2,100. We add the growth of 15,100. Now the numbers are a little different because we're now looking at a time frame of 2021 to 2051, and we're adding in jobs. So we're adding 15,100 people and jobs. That gives us a total of 17,200 people and jobs by 2051 in the designated greenfield area. We take that number at the bottom and we divide that by 50, and we get a land demand of 344 gross hectares. So on the next slide, we're going to compare that demand to the supply. So you will recall that previously identified that we have a total of 739 gross hectares of developable land in the DGA in terms of available supply. Those are lands that are available, both developed and vacant. When we compare that to the overall demand of 344 hectares, we get a surplus of 395 gross hectares of land. So what this is showing us is that we have more than enough designated greenfield land to accommodate our forecast to the urban areas of St. George and Paris to the year 51, and we will not require any more additional land to accommodate that growth. So in conclusion, the first conclusion that we are noting and the recommendation is that the county plan for a higher intensification target of 20% going forward. We think that that higher target is more reflective of recent, to some extent, recent development trends, but more broadly reflects the anticipated demand that we expect to see for a broader range of housing by type and tenure in the built-up areas, particularly in Paris, but also within St. George. And secondly, we are recommending to plan for a minimum density requirement of 50 people and jobs. And again, we feel that density reflects both active development applications in the process, as well as longer term trends that we would expect to see over the next 3 decades in your DGA area. And finally, on the last slide, we're concluding that overall, the county has a sufficient amount of community area lands to 2051, and in fact, has a surplus of 395 gross hectares of land within its current settlement areas to accommodate that growth that we've identified. And so, again, no settlement area boundary expansions for new designated greenfield areas to accommodate community areas. New community areas will be required to the year 2051. So again, we will be looking at employment areas in the next presentation. So any recommendations that we're giving tonight are only dealing with these community areas. So that concludes my presentation. I'm happy to turn it over to council, or sorry, to committee for questions, and if staff have anything further they want to add in terms of next steps.
Okay, thank you, gentlemen, and what we'll do at this point is we'll open it up to questions and discussions, and either to Jamie and Brad or to Jennifer from planning. So first hand I seen up was Councillor Howe, so we'll go to you first.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, thanks to everyone who participated in that. All of that information, you certainly put the comprehensive in a municipal comprehensive review. That's a lot of information, and I know it's a lot for us to digest. It's a lot for the residents and the audience for this video now and later to digest. I have a couple of questions for Jennifer. I think they're for Jennifer, and I really want to try and boil all of this information down to a couple key points. The province requires that we grow, and a lot of other municipalities grow. I'm thrilled to hear that there's no need for us to extend our settlement boundaries. I know there's other municipalities, and as was referenced earlier, I've talked to a councillor in Halton Hills. They're facing a very, very different situation there. So it's very good news that we can achieve what we're mandated to achieve within the existing settlement boundary with some room to spare. But the province requires us to grow by approximately 18,500 people, but they give us 30 years to do it, and I think that's a really key element. And if we responded strictly to consumer demand, and I should first say that 18,500 people that we're supposed to grow by translates, I think, into about 5,000 plus dwellings. And if we responded strictly to consumer demand or to the development community, they would perhaps want to see us, add those 5,000 dwelling units in the next 3 years. The demand is that hot for people wanting to live here. The builders certainly want to build them, but I think it's really important to look at how we can spread this out. And it said right in Jennifer's report, the words, the ability to slow and manage growth. And I always love it when we see those words. We do need to find an agreeable method of meeting the growth objectives. So, and I was paying a lot of attention to the numbers where it said, it looked at Paris growing by 145 units per year on average for 30 years. St. George, I think it was 55 units per year. I was surprised to see that in the last 5 years here in Paris, that our annual growth was approximately 69 units. I think the average resident would find that number surprising. It seems like there's a lot more houses being built than that. But my main question for you, Jennifer, is can you tell us a little bit more about how the official plan can give us the teeth to potentially resist those demands that would want to see us build the dwellings faster, and how we can indeed try and space them out to between Paris and St. George, 200 units per year. So I just like to, because some of us and some of the audience aren't as familiar with just what the official plan can do for us to space out all this growth over 30 years and not not have to take it all in the next few years, because it does kind of look that way. We know that there's 5,000 plus dwellings already in the pipeline. And I think that's just Paris. But spreading those out over 30 years is a lot more agreeable than just dealing with it. So that's my one question. My second question, which is much smaller, is if we've got excess land in our settlement boundary, if we've got, if we're able to achieve the numbers without using all of our settlement boundary, does that provide us an opportunity to physically space out the houses, to allow a little more land, a little more green space, and particularly to provide design direction into these subdivisions to allow for more car parking on properties rather than on the streets? Because one of the complaints we get quite a bit is that there's people can't park all their cars in their driveway, garages are full of stuff, and so cars end up parked all over the place. That's something that comes up a lot. I know that's a micromanage question, but I'm just, under the subject of us having excess land, I'm just wondering how that can fit into the official plan too. So that's a lot. I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Okay, Jennifer, 2 questions, but just at the same time, if any of the fellows from Watson Associate can add to the discussion, I'll ask that you do so, but we'll go to you, Jennifer. 2 questions from Steve. Managing that growth over the 30 years, and then can we expand it into the settlement areas?
All right, thank you, Councillor Miller, through you, Mr. Chair, to Councillor Steve House. Thanks for that excellent question. So what I'll do is I'll answer the first question first, which is basically about growth management and the phasing of development. I'll say what I need to say, and then I'll ask probably Jamie to jump in, or Brad from Watson and Associates as well. So the biggest thing is what you've seen in the presentation tonight, and I'll get Watson to elaborate on that, is really the slide about the allocation of growth per year. And what the official plan is going to do is we're coming up with, through the Municipal Comprehensive Review, a growth management strategy. The county currently doesn't have one, as we can attest to, but part of the MCR is to come up with this growth management strategy. And the compendium document is also a phasing of development plan. That actually adds to the allocation of growth each year. And we have to produce target numbers to the province each year and report on that. With the county right now, we've started to do that with development planning, as Matt is doing with his group, in terms of tracking development per year. And that's where in terms of the unit count on our designated greenfield areas, where we can have actually control over where and what development goes next. So that's the compendium document to the growth management strategy that we're also working on. It's a very, very important piece. As you know from, as we call it, the previous reports that have come about trying to control growth from 2019, that was sort of like a solution in terms of dealing with the amount of housing that's in the pipeline between 2016 and 2020. So it was at such a rapid pace. But the phasing of development strategy is what we're looking at doing, is the real way of controlling growth on designated greenfield areas. But I'll get either Jamie or Brad to jump in with the actual, how the unit count matters per year in terms of these allocation numbers.
Do either you gentlemen wish to answer or help Jennifer out here?
Yeah, I think Jennifer really covered off the bulk of it on that question. I think the key really is going to come down to phasing policies and ongoing monitoring. The growth plan does require us to achieve an overall, as we mentioned, intensification target, and we've set this target at 20%, and that's supposed to be achieved on an annual basis. So I think the province is also giving you further strength to establish policies to ensure that you achieve that overall growth rate, not just overall, but on an annual basis. And so I think there's more opportunity there to phase greenfield development with that overall target, so that those are occurring in step with that overall annual rate of growth. I didn't know if you wanted me to get in that second question about excess lands, or Jennifer, if you wanted to speak to that first in any further detail. Did you want me to start with that one?
Jamie, you can start with that, and then I can add a little bit after. Thanks.
Okay. So just in terms of the excess lands, there is a policy in the growth plan that deals with excess lands, and you do have the ability to look at those lands and identify that you do have more land or excess land than what's required, but it typically would only be triggered if you're looking to expand a boundary in a different location. So if you had, say, too much land in St. George, but you needed an expansion, hypothetically, if you needed an expansion in Paris, you'd have to identify those lands as excess in St. George before you could expand. But that's not the situation here. It's trying to, I understand that it's, you're trying to deal with the land you have and maybe make better, provide lower densities overall. The challenge is that by doing that, that would ultimately lower that DGA target that we have in place of 50 people and jobs. It may be, though, that you can still achieve, we're not getting down to that granular level of design here, but I think you can still achieve good urban design and proper parking at a density of 50. 50 people and jobs is not overly dense. When we've been talking about Halton Hills and Halton region right now are planning for a density range between 65 and 80. I know clearly Brent is not Halton, but you can get higher densities in DGA when you add a broader range of housing. So I'll just leave it at there with that question on the excess lands.
Jennifer, did you want to add anything, or you?
Yeah, I can add a little bit. As Councillor House remarked, just in terms of excess lands, about spacing the way we design our communities. So the county, one of the other compendium pieces for implementation is that we are working on urban design guidelines. And really, when you're looking at new communities in terms of the urban design and structure, especially with this recommended density target moving ahead, is really when it comes down to it, a lot of the parking considerations and new developments have to do with zoning and lot size, driveway width, width of the lot. And what ends up happening is the driveways are stacked together and there's nowhere to put a car on the street. That all talks about our zoning requirements. And actually with some of the new developments, we've already done some modifications, which you'll see in Brandon's upcoming housekeeping report for zoning, because it's been an issue in many subdivisions in the area about where to park cars, especially in higher density with townhouses and urban towns. You get a parking issue that happens frequently, and guests don't even have anywhere to park. Snow removal becomes a problem. So all these are nuances with all these different higher density communities that we're well aware of on established neighborhoods and other cities around the Greater Golden Horseshoe that were attuned to what's happening. So really, it's about our urban design considerations. We have the policy framework. Jamie's alluded into that and what excess lands is, but also it's really comes down to design and good planning practices. And you have to think of all the types of how people live, and there are going to be cars, and people will continue to use their cars as well. So we're in tune to all those issues, and hopefully we can bring those design forward. And then there's also been a lot of comments about, retaining characteristics of these new subdivisions of small town charm, the design and integration of, making it not so stark with the old versus the new. How can there be an interface integration, whether it means different street lighting that looks more heritage, or the frontage of design leading into the community that lends itself to a small town charm. So the comments have been well noted, so thank you.
Councillor Howes, you okay with that?
Yeah, thank you very much. And I have very high hopes indeed for what this official plan can do for helping us design the communities that we want. Everybody's done great work on this. I really appreciate it.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Pierce, I think that's your hand up. Yes.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Through you, Yeah, fabulous report. There's an absolute ton of information in there. So, a couple questions I have. Councillor Howe's kind of alluded to it. It's tough enough for people who have a little bit of an understanding of this to digest it. For folks out there that may be watching, or folks out there that may be interested in trying to not necessarily get the Coles Notes version, but to get a digestible version of this. Is there going to be something we're going to do, whether it be maybe a town hall, or maybe direct them to somebody to that they can contact? I just want to make sure that that information is out there for people to be able to read this document and understand what they're reading, and go somewhere if they do have any questions. That's my first one.
All right, through you, Chair Miller, to Councillor John Pierce. So the next phase of our engagement is to actually take some of this information on our website. We do have already our municipal comprehensive review, but we're adding to it more, and we are planning on more town halls. We've already booked Glenn, the facilitator. So moving into April, we're going to have additional town halls. We're also going to have another council workshop and some other public engagement pieces to start educating people about what the land needs mean, what the growth management strategy will what communities can look like physically on the ground. So we're getting more drilled down into more of the nitty-gritty issues about what the components mean to that. So yes, we are planning on those. And as you've seen already from our public engagement pieces, we've tried to make it, as glossy and as digestible in those small chunks, if you will. So yes, we are.
Absolutely. Glad to hear that. My second question here is, so just for confirmation, the province has dictated that we grow by 15%, and the suggestion here is that we up that by 20%. Did I understand that correctly?
You're asking Jennifer, and I believe you're talking about intensification targets?
That's correct, yeah.
All right, so you may get Brad Post of Watson or Jamie to answer that.
Yeah, okay. Brad or Jamie?
Brad, do you want to speak to that since you spoke to the intensification?
Yeah, sure. So the current intensification target is 15% in the county's OP, and so the county is required, according to the growth plan, to either maintain that 15%, so housing growth annually within the built-up area, or improve upon it. And so what we're recommending is that the county increase that from 15% to 20%. So 20% of housing growth annually within the county of Brent would occur within the built-up areas of St. George and Paris.
Okay. Thank you for that. And my final question here is, and the point, I think on the slide it said from 2016 to 2021, there was 69 units annually, and I know Councillor Howe's kind of touched on that. It is hard to understand that there's only 69 units per year within those years. Is it possible that we could get a bit of a breakdown on that? Because if you think of what's happening within Paris on Rest Acres Road, specifically in that area, those houses really didn't start to go up in there until, late 2018-19. So, they're not even counted in the first 3 years of that, so to speak. So it'd be interesting to see the numbers, even in smaller chunks if we could. That's from 16 to 21. What does 18 to 21 see, and what does 19 to 21 see? Because I think it would be a whole lot more than the 69 units. So I think there's a lot of questions by folks saying there's no way there's only 69 units. So I would appreciate if we could break that down a little bit to show what's been done in the last couple of years on that. It doesn't have to be done now, obviously. Other than that, like I say, fantastic report, and I look forward to anybody with any questions joining the town halls to get more information on this, and appreciate all the work that's been done. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I know what you mean. It seems like 169 every year. Is that possible, Jennifer, to get that breakdown of how those units were coming online? Because, yeah, it did seem to be slower in the earlier years, and then it seemed to pour on later. Is it possible to get that information to us?
Yes, thank you, Chair Miller. It absolutely is. And in fact, we've been giving that information to Watson. Our building department has broken down all that information, not only by type, it's actually even by housing type, all the different building permits. So absolutely, we have all that information we can give you.
Fantastic. Thanks again, guys.
Okay. Do I see any other hands up? Okay, I see Councillor LaFerriere, you go ahead. And then Councillor Goward.
Thank you, Councillor Miller. A lot of my compatriots have asked questions I was had on my list, but I do have one or two more. Jennifer, thanks so much for this report and all the work you and the entire team have been doing on this. It is excellent, and I do have hope for it, though my questions won't sound hopeful. I apologize for that in advance. When we look at the mandated growth from the province sets our minimums with the mandated growth, but that doesn't act as a cap on growth, does it?
What are you asking if the growth can be in exceed that of what the province says?
Yeah, that the targets are targets, and because some communities and people here wouldn't find this hard to believe, but some communities have a hard time meeting the targets based on the market and growth and development and the rest. But we have a hard time. We're going to have a hard time not going past the targets, but the targets aren't a maximum; they're a minimum. Like we have to grow to this point by a certain point. That's correct, isn't it?
Is that correct, Jennifer? Is Mark reading? Is Councillor LaFerriere reading that right?
For you, Miller, Councillor Ferry, yes, and you remember the December 8th presentation. It's a forecasted minimum, so it's a forecast rather than a target. The targets are intensification and density targets, but yeah, it's actually a minimum, and that was the Schedule 3 in terms of the growth plan amendment back in August 28th. But maybe Jamie, I can get you to add your 2 cents to that in terms of the provincial perspective on what that minimum means.
Yeah, thanks, Jennifer. Yeah, clearly, everyone's interpreted correctly. It is a minimum. It's a different way of looking at it than we had looked at it in the past, where those numbers were caps. So when we look at growth, it really comes down to what are the real caps for growth, and the real sort of constraints or the real ways to manage growth. I wouldn't want to call it a constraint. The real ways to manage growth are phasing policies, and there could be other planning tools to use to manage and phase and monitor growth, but also how you ultimately designate additional land and service that land. So what we're doing here is looking at an appropriate level of growth that's been assigned us to the growth plan and identifying the land requirements. So there is ultimately a limit to how much we can grow within those existing designated areas. So there is some management of that going on here, because we are controlling the amount of land that's designated and ultimately will be serviced. But it is really going to come down to these more granular issues of phasing and servicing to control this pace of growth.
So we're not simply able to say, well, we've hit our target, so let's stop growth. And I'm saying this, I know this, I'm saying this in part so people understand who are going to watch this now and later. And if zoning allows, landowners can apply, and if it meets the rules for planning practices, then whether it's through us voting for it at council or at a tribunal above us, chances are more growth is going to happen than the minimum, based on what we've seen in trends, based on what's already in the pipeline. So we can't cap the numbers. That's not really possible. But there is a desire from some folks to see that. There's also a desire for some folks to grow more. There's desires are all over the place. I'm wondering if we as the government body that we are, the municipal body that we are, and I don't mean councillors, I don't mean council, but I mean us as a county, if we're able to direct folks who want to be heard by the sort of higher governmental powers, if we can provide them information, and they may choose to use it or they may choose not to, but how they can be heard by the provincial bodies that legislate the system as a whole, that dictate the minimums and don't really have a maximum, that go through the planning processes. Because I think there's a disconnect. I think people think that municipally we have a magic wand and that we can, people don't like it, so let's stop it. We don't like it, so let's stop it. And I mean, since I've been on council, we've been at a tribunal or at appeal with, I think, 24 developments. So that is fighting some of this stuff, and it's still, we see what we see. So is there a way that we're able to do that? And I don't mean in a partisan way. I just mean if people should be able to be directed and then not be political in terms of in a partisan way, but people should be able to come to us. And if it is a provincial issue, have some way to be guided through how to advocate for what they think should happen. Now, is that just contact your MPP, or is there something else we can do above and beyond that to help people sort of figure out that path on how to organize as a community, however they see fit, not how we see fit?
Who wants to try and answer that question for Councilor Ferrier? Where can we direct people?
I think I'll turn that one back over to Jen.
Where's Brandon?
Okay.
Go ahead, Jennifer.
All right, thank you, Chair Miller, to Councillor LaFerriere. So I guess, I mean, as Jamie's alluded to, and also when I came to you on December 8th with the gross forecasting, and it's really the province is dictating, and you know the political change that each provincial government waves their magic wand, so to speak. It was different with the Liberal government. I mean, they had different protectionism policies, which also had pro and con, but now there's this mandate of the province of more homes, more choice, and the changes to the reference forecast as we know it. But just as an interesting aside, like the forecasts were changed, and I went to those workshops, actually it was a year ago today, that I was downtown Toronto, in terms of actually like what those forecasts mean, because some municipalities are actually going way beyond their target. And as you've noted, Councillor Ferrier, some are not meeting the target, like more towards, you know, the east of Ontario, like they aren't meeting them. So really, what we're seeing right now, especially with this provincial government, is their political will, and really it comes down to politics in terms of their dictation of, you know, the actual mandate for housing and development for more homes, more choice. So it could be as much as contacting our MPP. You know, we've had discussions with MPP Will Belma. He is very aware of the issues in the county, but if council or whoever wants to write the provincial government, I mean, that's something that it's always up to an individual or council if they want to do that. But really what it comes down to is there's some differences, because as Jamie said before we had a cap, but now we have like a flexibility floor, as they're calling it. So they've played with words in a way, in terms of giving municipalities some flexibility, but it's a different type of flexibility because it can turn a different way. So I'll leave it at that.
No, thank you. I just think, as a comment, I think a lot of folks don't understand the change that's happened from a cap to a flexible floor, or whatever term is used. The same way the terms for affordable housing have changed and mutated over time by multiple governments. I'm not picking on any one of them. So there isn't, you know, people can apply to LPAT, et cetera, but there isn't like an ombudsman where people could generally go that would collect this information for the purposes of planning in Ontario. It would just be more contact the government more broadly. And nobody needs to answer that right now. Just if you don't have sometime, that'd be great. But yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Councilor Goward, you had your hand raised, I believe. You want to go ahead?
Yes, I did. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question is a little bit different. We've heard about the growth forecasts. We've heard about intensifying development in the existing areas of Paris and St. George. And we know that the large developers have speculated long ago and bought big tracts of land and are going to build these homes. And I'm wondering, what if someone in our county doesn't want to live in St. George or Paris? What if they want to buy a country lot and build a home or buy a home from a local home builder in one of our settlement areas? And that provides jobs to our local people. We don't have a lot of lots available in the country right now. And the lots in the Oak Hill area are selling like hotcakes. A little while ago, we draft plan approved 22 lots in Oakland. They're all sold. And the local builders seem to like to buy the smaller areas. It's more manageable for them. It provides work for their crews, their employees. And we're not recommending that we expand any of the settlement boundaries. My question is, we've had requests for expansion in the Oak Hill area. And the Oak Hill area is very close to the city of Brantford. It's a very desirable area. And the 3 small subdivisions that are currently being worked on there are going to be snapped up. Well, one has already been snapped up. We just approved another one the end of February. And since we've had additional requests in that area, why can't we round out some of the areas in Oak Hill so that there are some lots available if a farmer wants to move close to the city and have a little space and have a new home to retire to, because they can't get retirement lots anymore on their farms. Why can't we do that? Or can we? I know we have 395 hectares too much already within Paris and St. George, but like I said, not everybody wants to live there. So is it possible to expand the Oak Hill settlement boundary around the fringe to allow for a different type of development? Municipal water is available there. We just put in a new water tank, and I'm not sure how many homes we have for water, but that tank was oversized. And to me, being close to the city boundary, it's a logical place for some houses. So if somebody could answer that.
Okay, we'll go to Jennifer for that.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Chair Miller through Councillor Gatward. So I'm going to do this in about 3 parts because it's a bit of a convoluted answer because it has to do with our allocations for the rural area. There's a servicing component. So, and then I can answer in terms of a policy perspective about what this means and the proposals that we do have for different areas outside of our urban settlement areas. So I guess the first thing I'll do is ask, because Rob Walton's on the call. I don't know if Rob's is there right now, but in terms of actually servicing areas outside of our urban settlement areas, we've got, the Oak Hill Airport area, and there are requests for expansion of the settlement area boundary there. We also have interest in Keensville as well. And also there is also, interesting proposals coming in Burford, and all 3 of those areas have, a review of servicing going on, and what that means in terms of, new development moving forward. Perhaps we can talk first about what that means in terms of servicing. So I don't know, Rob, if you're able to answer that question, if he's in the meeting right now. There he is.
Through the chair to Councillor Gatward. Those are big and complicated questions. I'm actually being asked a lot of policy there. The areas you're talking about there being Oak Hill to start out with actually is only on water at this time for the residential out there. And clearly in the growth plan, both services, water and wastewater, is generally required for any amount of growth to happen. Our agreement with the city right now does not anticipate residential growth in that area. It anticipates growth on the airport lands and commercial and industrial. And actually, as per our strategy and through the boundary adjustment plan there, we aren't actually proceeding with anything at this time with as far as wastewater in the airport area. In Canesville, we're looking at water and wastewater improvements there, but that area is entirely, the growth area there is entirely commercial industrial. And right now we are looking at servicing for Burford, and there's an ongoing plan looking at that.
Yeah, thank you very much, Rob. I appreciate that. So I can answer the second part to Councillor Gathward's question, and then I'll ask Jamie to jump in as well in terms of growth allocation. So in terms of our rural area, in terms of our allocation, you saw in the presentation that Watson has put, additional growth in terms of rural, because we do actually have a lot of designated residential land in the rural area. And there are some small scale developments coming in that have been in the pipeline for quite some time. These are larger lots, like the 1 acre to 1 hectare lots on private servicing. So there are those in the pipeline or interest in developing them in smaller, like Oakland and Scotland, and like you said, some small rounding out in Oak Hill. But obviously, Rob's alluded to quite a few servicing constraints. But we do have proposals in for a boundary expansion in Oak Hill, which we do have to look at, which is coming at a later meeting as we review. But I guess really what we're looking at in terms of any expansion is when you expand, no matter what, even if we had to expand in Paris, is you're looking at expanding onto prime agricultural land. And the province has some very strict rules in terms of any net loss to the agricultural layer. We have to do a countywide agricultural impact assessment on any lands that are taken away out of the agricultural system. So it's not as easy just to convert them to residential lands, but that's part of our process. And also we do have a mandate to protect prime ag lands as well. But part of this is that, we do have an interesting dichotomy about the County of Brant in terms of our allocation of growth, because there, as you saw in the figures, there is still a lot of settlement and population in our rural areas. But maybe I'll get Jamie to jump in right now in terms of what that meant to the allocation to the rural area and how we're looking at those numbers. Because people do want to live in the rural area. And as you know, we don't have many lots left. And as we've talked about, so.
Yeah, thanks. Sorry.
Oh, before Jamie jumps in though, could I just ask, I didn't get an answer to how many, I realize it's only on municipal water, the Oak Hill area, but so is Mount Pleasant, and Mount Pleasant is growing, except it has water constraints right now until the city can service Tootle Heights. But my question was, how many homes can that new water supply service over and above the 82 lots that are in those 3 existing subdivisions that are now coming online? That was my question. And also, Jennifer, you said we have to justify to the province using farmland, well, prime farmland. I'm not sure that land along Oak Hill Drive is prime farmland, but that would have to be looked at. And the other thing that you mentioned, so if the province wants to look at using agricultural land, is that only outside of a settlement boundary, or would that include, say, the lands inside a settlement boundary within, say, Burford? And you could answer that before we go to Jamie. I'd appreciate that. The number of homes that new water tower could provide water for, and the other about the prime land and so on.
Well, we'll go to Rob first and then Jennifer. Go ahead.
I'll ask Rob Walton answer your question about the amount of units in the airport area.
Through the chair to Councillor Goward, I don't have an answer to that question off the top of my head. We certainly could provide it given time.
Okay, we'll get that information to you. Jennifer, did you want to talk to what Councillor Gatward mentioned about maybe those settlement farmland questions?
Okay, I'll do that, and then I'll get Jamie to jump in with any additional information. So I'm just getting my notes here. So basically, like, it is true. Like, we have to look at the assessment of our agricultural system with any settlement area boundary. But when you look at, say, Burford, it has an extremely large settlement area boundary that has already a designation outside of that built-up area, the core main street, and the rest of the settlement. So there's quite a large of what we call greenfield land in Burford already. That's included in the village boundary as well. So that's something as well that we're looking at. Even though it's zoned agriculture, it actually has a land use designation of residential at the moment. So, and that goes for Oakland as well and Scotland. They also have some residential designations within the village boundaries as well. It's just that it's vacant land at the moment as well. And a lot of it, we actually don't have any development proposals on to date. So there's still opportunities there, but obviously in the rural area, any development would have to be on well and septic on larger lots. We do have some proposals in that look at different types of systems and some more intensification, but those proposals are in discussion. So, and then I'll have Jamie to jump in finally about just rural growth allocation numbers to close that off.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Jen. A lot's been covered already, so I'll try to be brief. I think the real balance, or the art here, is to be balanced, and that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to look at the broader growth management picture here, and I've been trying to stress, and if I haven't, I'll stress again, that these rural areas are outside of the larger settlement areas are very important to the county. They serve a role in accommodating growth and overall contributing to the economic development and vitality of the county. And we don't want these areas to be in a state of decline or unduly constrained. But at the same time, we do have to recognize that there are broader provincial policies that we need to adhere to, as well as county policies and principles. And generally, those policies and principles direct growth to fully serviced settlement areas with water and sewer. So there could be small scale development that would be permitted in these areas that are on private services. And it could be that in some cases or at some points in time, the growth exceeds our allocation because it is a minimum, but it's something that we would want to be tracking and monitoring over time. I think I would just leave it at that, there's a need to really make sure that we're properly balancing this allocation. When we get to the strategic policy stages of the study, there may be a need to look at settlement areas within these rural areas, and that is not going to be done through a prescriptive land budgeting process like we've done here. As I mentioned at the outset of this presentation, that the rural area is being looked at as in a broader sense. It's everything outside of these two urban areas. You do have the sort of leverage to look at those settlement boundaries from a broader planning perspective to determine if there needs to be any adjustments made, and we can definitely take a look at that at that point in time. But it's important to manage the sort of expectations and make sure we're adhering to those broader policies in terms of the amount of growth that we would be trying to accommodate outside of Paris and St. George.
Okay, thank you, Jamie. Does anyone else have any other questions? Councillor Bell.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to Jennifer or the Watson team. If we were short of land, higher intensification and density targets would be an obvious thing to address. Tell me and tell the viewers why we should accept higher intensification and higher density targets when we're not short of land.
All right.
Through you, Ms.
Yep, go ahead. Jamie,
Who wants to start?
Jamie, do you want Jamie to answer this one, Jennifer? Go ahead, take a crack at it.
Okay, thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. We have been required to do a comprehensive analysis looking at the overall ability to accommodate the growth plan, the growth forecast that was allocated to Brant to 2051, and that's what we've done. And so our policies on and targets with respect to density intensification are not purely based on how much land you have today. That's a component of it, but we're also looking at what we think is an appropriate target to establish, going back to those broader policies in the growth plan and more locally down to your OP. So we're trying to balance the broader objectives, planning objectives of creating complete communities and more compact communities that are making better use of existing infrastructure and public facilities. But we're also trying to look at a market through a market lens as well, which is the reason why we've gone through all this trouble of looking at existing conditions and looking at the trends, and also looking at those broader economic drivers that we identified. A lot of that focus was on the first presentation back in December. So putting all that together, this is what we think is an appropriate, these are appropriate targets for density and intensification. And that's ultimately why we've landed.
So why did you not present us with alternatives that would then demonstrate the benefits of the end product that you're proposing?
It's something you could do. There's nothing wrong with presenting alternatives, but in this case, we've gone to the preferred scenario. We've done the analysis in detail, and we've provided what we think is the appropriate and ultimately what I would consider. You can use different terms, either whether it's preferred or most likely, but I feel that this is the appropriate density target to achieve and the appropriate intensification to target to achieve. Anything that I think you achieve or you target lower or higher than those targets is probably less accurate than what we're recommending tonight. So it's something that can be done if you want to look at alternatives. It doesn't necessarily change the story in a big way, but I guess it gives you the opportunity if you want to select something different. And I guess the only scenario where I would see wanting to do that is if you don't feel satisfied that these recommended targets are appropriate, or whether you just feel that you would want a broader range of targets to select from and evaluate, and that could be done. But we didn't feel that was necessary through this process.
So let me give you a thought. I mean, you showed a nice picture of a street with bike lanes and trees and lots of pavements. I don't know whether there is a road like that in anywhere around here. And if we had a little less density target, I could imagine that we could accommodate all those things. And it brings me back to having read the Southwest Paris area study that was written many years ago. That's exactly the kind of image that was left in the reader's mind. And what happens is a developer comes along and he says, oh no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to build something much tighter, more houses, I'm going to make more profit. I'm just concerned that we're actually just serving a market. You said, you've given us the preferred case. It's preferred by yourself. It's not necessarily preferred by this council because we haven't had the opportunity to see alternatives.
Is that a comment, Councillor Bell?
Well, the question is, can I see alternatives to what's being proposed tonight? I know we're being driven by an end date, and I don't want to be driven by an end date because we'll end up with a product that isn't what we want. It'll be what we can do at the time available. So I want to know, can I see alternatives to 20 and 50? Show me 15 and 40 and show me what the difference would look like. We have enough land.
Through you, Mr. Chair, if I could just respond, there is definitely the ability to do that, to provide alternatives. And I don't mean to say that the scenario is preferred. That might not be the right choice of words. I do think it's the more likely or the most likely. I do want to also just emphasize, though, that I do appreciate the the comments about the density and some of the concerns about looking at an image like that and looking at it maybe looking too urban or not appropriate to the character of, say, what's happening in Brant or St. George today. But I just really want to emphasize that you need to be looking forward at the changes that are going to be happening demographically in Brant, and you are going to be aging and you're going to be diversifying. You are going to need to accommodate a much broader range of housing in the future by housing type and by tenure than what you've been accommodating so far. So that's a much broader range of townhomes, potentially low and mid-rise apartment, condominium, seniors housing, social housing. All these different types of products are going to need to be required, and some of those products are going to be in your designated greenfield area. Some of them will be in your built-up area. So it is important to look at that, and it's also important to make sure that that housing product that you're providing appropriately matches the kind of labor force that you're trying to attract, because that's what we're going to be getting into next time when we speak in March or April, is about how the economy is growing, and that connection between labor force attraction and housing accommodation are inextricably linked, and you can't have one without the other. And so I just want to emphasize that need to have diversity in housing typology.
Yeah, thank you. If I may, another question, Mr. Chairman. On page 173 of the report, you write, the supply of approved brackets unbuilt housing units exceeds demand by 1,200 units. And you also go on to say there are 1,750 units still in the unapproved pipeline. Can you explain, or can somebody in staff explain how we got ourselves in this place where we've already overcommitted relative to the plan? And it goes back a little bit to what Councillor Leferrier said. We've been at pains to try and tell people we're going to grow to 59,000. If I believe this and nothing changes, we'll be growing to more than 59,000. We've been telling our population, our residents, something that isn't actually true. So can somebody tell me how we got here and what we can do about it?
Yeah, I know what you're saying. If you look at all the houses already there approved or in the pipeline, yeah, we're there. So, and I know I talked to Jennifer earlier today about, or yesterday about that, but who would like to take a stab at this?
Through you, Chair Miller, to Councillor Bell. So I guess in terms of the numbers, I could get Jamie to elaborate on them, and then I can talk more specifically about the phasing of development, but I don't know if Jamie, you want to take that first, or?
Thanks, and I don't think there's much more I would say. I think the main question is really how you got there. I think we've been fairly thorough about this discussion about there's a lot more in the supply than ultimately what we're allocating in the near term, and that is no mystery. So in terms of how we got there, I think it's best for you to provide a little more background on that, if possible.
And you're referring to Jennifer, I take it, Jamie?
Sorry, yes. Sorry, Mr. Chair, yes.
Through you, Chair Miller, to Councillor Bell. So in terms of how we got here today, I mean, you see the growth of what's happening and you see the building permits. So we've provided all that, those statistics, and it's really the numbers between 2016 to 2020. Has been asked, can we see the breakdown of permits to the 2022 number, and then the numbers that are going from 2022 to 2026 to 2032 to 2036. And this is the available supply and what we call the pipeline, and what is actually in the pipeline when we say there could be draft approved, it could be registered, it could be pending, it could be under review. And then there's things that we've discussed already, like, you know, mentioning to Councillor Gatward in terms of lands in the rural area and the designated greenfield that have no applications whatsoever. It's just vacant land that someone owns that's designated urban residential, and there's no application whatsoever. but we expect at some point that someone could come forward at any point with a subdivision application if it's part of our designated land. So we have to take all that into consideration, but it's really the pipeline in terms of the amount of units, and it was alluded to Councillor Ferrier and Councillor House in terms of these numbers could be built out in the next 5 years in terms of the amount of units, but it really comes down to the phasing of development and the numbers that reach us to 2051. And you and I had a chat already about, what those numbers meant to the county, to the specific date, but it was really when the province changed the reference forecast back in August to add those extra 10 years. Councillor House alluded to the fact that we've got an extra 10 years now, and this was the revision to the numbers that we were looking at in terms of that actual pipeline to space it out. And that's the 145 units in terms of the phasing of development. But I think we all know, unfortunately, how we got here in terms of a lot of LPAT appeals, a policy regime, oversupply of land. That's how we got here, really. It's really now in terms of the next official plan, in terms of what we can actually control in terms of the actual phasing of growth. So
I'm terribly confused, and I don't like to be confused, because if I look at page 209, you say the remaining vacant DGA land is 200 hectares, and yet you said we have a surplus of 395. So am I missing something there? Does this account for the extra 1,190 units that are already in excess of demand and the 1,750 that are in the pipeline? You don't have to answer that right now. It's a difficult question, so please don't try. Let me tell you what my back thought is on this. We have excess land. We have already apparently exceeded the supply exceeds the demand. My worry is that this will be picked up in the province and they'll say, aha, Alton Hills hasn't got enough, Brant's got plenty. Let's change the targets. So we do need to be really thoughtful about this official plan and how we phrase what we're prepared to have built in Brant, because I think there's a real danger that we will feel pressure to grow further and faster. And I'll stop at that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Bell. Councilor Bell, cognizant of the time, but is there any other questions or comments? Okay, seeing none, I'll just say that going back to what you said, Councilor Bell, because you were asking about why they wanted the intensification targets. I thought that was the whole gist of their report, or the bulk of their report. It was listed in there, and I thought they laid out some pretty good reasons. They're following what I seen were the trends that were going in. They're looking at different housing. They're looking at demographics. They're looking at the marketplace. That's how I read it anyways. I have one very, very simple question. I'll direct this to Jennifer. You talk about in the Watson report, there's 395 surplus hectares, I believe it's hectares, of designated greenfield area. In the official plan, does that stay designated as potential residential lands, or do we, or how do we treat that in the new official plan, or do we just leave it as is? We don't remove it from that category, do we? That designation?
Well, thank you, Chair Miller, and I'll respond to your question. We leave it as designated greenfield area.
Okay.
However, there is a caveat in the growth plan and the land needs assessment that we can declare excess lands. We could do that. I mean, that's up to a council decision.
Okay.
Based on our land needs assessment, we can basically, as an outer ring municipality, we can declare we do have excess lands. And basically the municipality and you as council has a decision that we could actually prohibit development on those lands in the plan horizon where appropriate. We could use tools to either remove those rights for development. We can declare a surplus as we've done, take away development rights. We could, but that is a political decision that, that you'd have to decide.
So as it stands now, we leave it as designated greenfield areas, but we do have options as a council. So maybe Councillor Bell and I have a follow-up discussion on that, because I certainly don't dismiss what he says or take it lightly. I could see the province looking at Brand saying, you know, you got 395 extra hectares sitting around. Maybe take advantage of it. But we'll leave that discussion for another day. Okay. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for your report. Jennifer, I appreciate that. And again, being cognizant of the time, I'm going to go back to my agenda. There is a recommendation, 9.2 from Jennifer, and she's looking at appropriate intensification housing target, intensification of 20%, in a designated greenfield area density target of 50 people and jobs per gross hectare, and that staff be directed to complete the municipal comprehensive review. So I'm going to look to the committee and see if we can get that recommendation on the floor. So you can move her in a second. Moved by Councillor Wheat, second by Councillor Bell. Okay, appreciate it, Councillor McCallum, I missed you. Do we have any further discussion? We'll go to Councillor Chambers. We've not heard from you on this.
Just with regard to the recommendations, going back to what Councillor Pierce said originally, this report is, and everybody says there's a lot to it, there's a lot there. We've had a pretty good discussion tonight. I'm just wondering, does the recommendations, this is going to go out to public consultation, further public consultation. So are we just receiving the report with the expectation that it's going to go out to the public and we're going to have comments come back, and then we're going to adopt the conclusions or the recommendations? Or are you looking for us to conclude the recommendations tonight and then go tell the people what we concluded?
Okay, the way I say, I think we need to move on this so that they can do their other part. But Jennifer, can you, you're shaking your head different directions, so I'll let you answer this one.
All right, thank you, Chair Miller, to Councillor Chambers. So this is a preliminary analysis tonight, and it was for information and direction. And we're doing a lot more consultation because we don't have our draft or our municipal comprehensive review yet. And I've been fielding quite a few calls from the development industry in the last couple of days, and we are still consulting, and we're open for additional suggestions and information. This is not the final. So definitely not. That's coming in a few months. So.
But you're looking for direction. Okay.
So then, Mr. Chairman, what is the resolution on the floor? That we received the report? And then allow for public consultation, and then request that the further report come back after the public has been consulted and the partners and other important people who wish to make comment.
Yeah, to be honest with you, I think that's a fair interpretation. Jennifer, would you agree with that?
Yes, I agree with that.
Okay, yeah, no, you summed it up very good. Thank you. Yeah.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, if you could just read the resolution that's before us to vote on.
Yeah, okay. Councillor Gatward, can I read it first, or is there something pressing that you want to mention before I do that? Okay, you're on mute, so I will go ahead and read it then. Recommendation, whereas.
Sorry, if we're going to just receive it, then I'll hold my question, but I wasn't prepared to approve that recommendation as it's written. But if we're only receiving it, I think Councillor Chambers is exactly right. If we're having public consultation, then we need to hold this recommendation until such time as we've examined everything thoroughly. And I'd be happy to.
Okay, hold on, Councillor Gatward. I will. If you read the second last paragraph, it says, where's the municipal comprehensive review preliminary analysis, okay? And that's what this one is, has determined. So keep that in mind, okay? So we're looking at a preliminary analysis. It's not the final one. as Jennifer says, we still got some consultation, and there's a couple other studies I know they want to work on. So that's what it is. But as per Councilor Chambers, I will read it. It's been moved in second, but whereas council approves scenario 1, growth plan reference scenario, reflecting the most likely population and employment forecast over the long-term planning horizon to 2051 as described in RPT 20-229 dated December 8th, 2020. And whereas based on feedback from RPT 20-229, staff proposed modified rural and urban area growth allocation numbers as presented in report RPT 2129. And whereas staff have undertaken an analysis and have determined there are sufficient residential lands, surplus of gross 395 gross hectares within our current urban settlement areas to accommodate population, housing and population related employment, that no settlement area boundaries or new designated greenfield areas will be required for the community area to the year 2051. And whereas the municipal comprehensive review preliminary analysis has determined an appropriate intensification housing target of 20% and designated greenfield area density target of 50 people and jobs per gross hectare, that staff be directed to complete the municipal comprehensive review for the purposes, I should say, of the county's new official plan based on the technical details outlined in report 2129. So again, it's a preliminary analysis and we're directing staff, to move on, but it's not the final, I guess is where we're going. So, Councilor Gatward.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The paragraph that I have a problem with is where it states, and that no settlement area boundary expansions or new designated greenfield areas will be required for the community area to the year 2051. And that speaks to my question earlier, Mr. Chairman, regarding the Oak Hill area, which staff said they would look into. So if we pass this recommendation as written, we're basically approving that no area, no settlement area boundary expansions happen.
Okay, and maybe my interpretation is that on the whole, it doesn't happen, but it's not to say that one couldn't happen, but maybe I'm misinterpreting that. Jennifer, what Councilor Gatward saying, that there's no new settlement boundaries anywhere in the county ever again?
To 2051, that's what it says.
Through you, Chair Miller, to Councillor Gatward. So the intent of tonight was to focus on basically our urban settlement areas. So we were looking at Paris and St. George. So the way it's written, it says no settlement area boundary expansions, but the intent of the report tonight was about our community area residential land needs. The rural areas have the different allocation. I mean, that's still on the table and we do have some other proposals. But that's up to council. Again, this is a preliminary analysis tonight and it's got some information as for direction, but that was the intent of tonight's report.
Okay, well, just to be clear then, that statement only refers to Paris and St. George.
Jamie can elaborate on that a little bit.
Thanks, Jen. Yes, that is the case. We're really only looking at what I defined as or coined as the urban system under the land budget, which under that methodology is only talking about Paris and St. George, and that's what we're talking about tonight. So if that's unclear, then the wording could be changed. Otherwise, it should be noted that we're only speaking to those two urban areas when we're talking about the land requirements.
So it could say within the, that no settlement area boundary expansions or new designated greenfield areas within the Paris and St. George growth areas. Would that clarify it? So that it doesn't mean, excuse me, the whole county. It doesn't mean the whole county. Yeah, if we could add that, then I can vote for this.
Yeah, I'll let you work on an amendment to that. We'll go to Councilor Chambers.
I would just ask, speaking to the resolution, a question then. If we've decided there's no further growth activity in or expansion of urban settlement lands in St. George and Paris, then why are we going out for public consultation to hear the public input on whether we should expand the boundaries of Paris and St. George? Seems like we've made a decision and we don't need the public consultation with regard to the urban settlement areas in St. George and Paris. That's why I have a difficulty with the resolution, and that's why we're doing a little bit more than receiving a preliminary report, because we're actually making some conclusions.
Jennifer, what's this tying us to when we should we pass this? What's it?
Through you, Chair Miller. So the third paragraph, we could also just add the word preliminary into that paragraph as well, because this is also preliminary information that could satisfy Councillor Chambers and Councillor Gatward, because it really is preliminary, and it's a presentation of information, and that's the information. But again, we have to do additional consultation on this, and this is still draft information. It's not the final. That's coming in June. So we could add that into the third clause as preliminary. And we can also clarify with Paris and St. George for residential lands. We could modify the motion, but I'll leave it up to discussion.
Okay, I'm just, if you were to put the word preliminary in there, Jennifer, where would you, I know you said the third paragraph, but where would you put that?
Through Chair Miller. So the third paragraph, or the third clause, where it reads, and whereas staff have undertaken an analysis, we could say, and whereas staff have undertaken a preliminary analysis, and then it goes on, and that the preliminary analysis has determined that no settlement area boundary expansions for Paris, George, for residential lands or new designated greenfield areas will be required for the community area for the year 2051.
Good amendment.
Okay. We could make that an amendment, or we could make that a friendly amendment, and that would of course depend on the mover and the seconder for that one. We'll go to Councillor Pierce and then we'll tackle this. Go ahead.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Through you. So there's a few things in this that I'm, not 100% supportive in the way that it's written either. So what I want to understand, what would the difference be if we were just to receive this report, and like the first paragraph of the recommendation can stay and the last paragraph can stay, but the three in between, like what will change in the direction if we were to just receive this, make the recommendation, whereas approved scenario 1, that's fine and dandy, that we receive this report for information and that staff be directed to complete the municipal comprehensive review for the purposes of the county's new official plan. So I want to understand, how will that change our next steps in this? Because we've already stated, and I agree, I'm not totally set on the 20% and the 50 and the 50 people jobs per gross hectare. Councillor Gatward's not, she's not liking the idea of the not being able to potentially expand the settlements. So what would change if we were to just receive this report for information and we continue on with the next steps?
Through Chair Miller to
Yeah.
Pierce. So really nothing. It's really, tonight was about information and direction. It's just that the 3 additional clauses or paragraphs gives some meat and potatoes, so to speak, for additional direction to staff. But based on feedback tonight, this information was really brought to your attention. And now that we've heard the feedback, the direction really is to tell us as staff to keep moving. But to take those 3 clauses out, we could. It doesn't change anything. We are moving ahead with the MCR work. And it would be noted that we have to do further, further work, and we are doing additional consultation, and we would have to take that back.
Okay. So, if we're talking amendments or friendly amendments or anything like that, Mr. Chair, I would appreciate an opportunity to throw a friendly amendment that we just received this as information, and we move forward with none of the information about the targets or that stuff, because it's all in the report. Just receive it. That's my 2 cents.
Okay, and it's fair enough, because this is why we have these good discussions. Because I think, Jennifer, what you're saying, okay, obviously it's information. We've all seen it for the first time when we got our package. We've read it, we've heard it in tonight. But what you're looking for is additional direction, additional feedback. I think we've given you some, I think. And maybe we could, because at some point I know we're going to have to be a little more firm as far as when we move further along in the official plan. But I think at some point when we do that, we'll have to maybe tighten up the language a little bit, if that makes sense. So if you're okay, it sounds like we could do that. We'll just receive that for information. But does anyone want to speak to that before we start getting into the nuts and bolts of that? Councillor Chambers.
Mr. Chairman, if it was me, I would craft a resolution that said something like that: we received the report, and the report be presented for community or for comment through community engagement, and further that the community input be presented to council for further consideration on the report.
Yeah, and I totally agree, and we will get to that. But let's go to the mover and seconder, because it is on the floor, and see if they are amenable to us receiving that. And I'll go to Adam, and who was our first mover and seconder? Is he still
the mover was Councillor Wheat and the seconder was Councillor Bell.
Okay. And Councillor Wheat, Councillor Bell, are you okay with that motion if we... Councillor Wheat?
Yep.
Okay. Councillor Bell?
Yep.
Okay. So so the motion then, rather than that moved as written, will be further to what Councillor Chambers says, that we receive this, in that staff continue to do further consultation on the report and the said targets as presented in the report. Is that fair, Councillor Chambers? Okay. Adam, is that fair? Can you work with that?
Yes, thank you. I got it.
Okay. And Jennifer, I hope you're okay with that. So, any questions? Okay, Councillor Pierce.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a comment, and I don't want it to be taken the wrong way about the work that went into this report, because there was a ton of work, and I totally appreciate it. But I think at this point in time, receiving this for information and continuing on with the public input and bringing it back, to me, I think it's easier to digest through that way. So I am in full support of this new amendment. Thank you.
Fair enough. Again, cognizant of the time, I don't want to debate it too long, so I'll call the question. All in favor? Opposed? Okay, that one's carried. Again, thank you to Watson and Associates, Jamie, Brad, appreciate it. Like Councillor Pierce says, a lot of good information. We just want to see it. We want to see it how it evolves from here. So, Councillor Goward, what's up? Because we'd like to keep moving on.
Yes, and I just wanted to ask, the consultation that's going to move forward with the public, will that be in the form of them coming to speak to us at a planning meeting, or will we be having town hall type consultation meetings?
Through you, Chair Miller, to Councillor Gatward, we're booking not only town hall meetings, obviously we have to do everything virtual again due to COVID. We're having online engagement again, and then as we move forward, we're having special meetings of council, which is a Planning Act forum, and also we're doing a Section 26 special meeting of council, which is actually a public delegation forum as well. And also we're also talking to the development industry at upcoming workshop and also meetings as well. So, and I've had a lot of feedback from them in the last few days as well. So
That's great. Thank you very much.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Councillor Goward. Okay, we're going to keep moving on here. That takes us to items 10. No consent items were listed. Communications, none. Other business, nobody mentioned anything at the beginning. So we're going to go to in camera. We're not going to take a break because I can't afford to.